Chapter 1205. However, at this moment, Air Maiden's surroundings were suddenly shrouded by an invisible existence. This invisible existence completely isolated her from all the changes in the outside world. Even if the aura world outside was collapsing and being destroyed, it could not affect her and God Creation Boy who was held by her. However, the collapse of the aura world did not slow down because of this. Instead, it continued to spread in all directions like before, gradually turning the aura world surrounding the huge portal into a neutral and peaceful aura mixed with a destructive aura. It formed an unpredictable light and shadow that seemed illusory and real, filling the portal in the center of the vortex. Among these auras, there were 10 locations where the same situation happened to Air Maiden. There was also an invisible existence that shrouded a certain living being, completely isolating them from any external influences that they might encounter, so that they would not be hurt by the collapse of the aura world. These living beings were obviously divine gods, Shentuan, and the others. At this moment, they were looking at the changes around them in confusion. They had been comprehending Luo Fan's Tao Master imprint all these years and comprehended the many mysteries within it. Just when they felt that their cultivation realm was soaring like a rocket, they suddenly found that the surrounding world had completely disappeared after a change, and they were shrouded by an indescribable light and shadow. They were in an incomparably wonderful void. This feeling naturally made them completely confused. In particular, it was even more so when their knowledge was far inferior to that of Air Maiden and the others. As for the invisible existence that protected them around them, they did not know what it was. Air Maiden glanced at them, and then looked at Luo Fan, who was floating in the center of the huge portal, to see the various inexplicable changes that were happening to him. At this time, Luo Fan was quietly floating in the air. There was not a trace of aura coming out from his body. At first glance, his entire body looked like it was floating in the air. At first glance, he looked like a lifeless stone statue. However, if one took a closer look, they would find that he was not a lifeless stone statue. Although there was no aura, no movement, no activity, the sense of existence of life was strong beyond imagination. Anyone who stared at him for more than a second would feel that he was the origin of life, the ancestor of all living beings in the universe. The mysteries and characteristics of all living beings could be found in him. Furthermore, all the mysteries of the universe could be found in that body. Whether it was living or non-living, even the supreme great Tao in the dark, all traces of its existence could be found on that person's body. This feeling was not fixed. Instead, it was growing with the passage of time. At first, perhaps it was just a little taste, but as time passed, this feeling became stronger and stronger. In the end, it even had a tendency to completely replace all of one's senses, completely changing one's worldview, transferring a person's understanding of the universe to this body. Of course, this was only the case for ordinary people. For the Space Maiden who had started to sort out her worldview, she naturally wouldn't go to such an extent. However, even if it hadn't reached that point, the Space Maiden could still feel the Tao Master brand in the depths of her divine soul. As time passed, as she observed Luo Fan's body, it became clearer, more complete, more stable, and more mysterious. If it had just been formed, the Tao Master brand could only exist for millions of years. Later on, the Tao Master brand even reached the point where it could continue to exist even if the Space Maiden had not seen Luo Fan for hundreds of millions of years. This kind of stable growth had already reached an unimaginable level. The Space Maiden finally felt completely relieved after discovering this. The change of the Tao Master brand was obviously corresponding to the change that was happening to Luo Fan's body. From the fact that the Tao Master brand had become more complete, more stable, and clearer, it was obvious that what was happening to Luo Fan was a good thing. It was a good thing that was extremely beneficial to his cultivation. The mysterious existence that enveloped the Space Maiden was obviously set up by Luo Fan. Although the world that had collapsed at the center of the vortex was only a world with an aura, it was still a powerful and mysterious world. Although the collapse of this world wouldn't destroy everything in this world like the true collapse of the world, it would definitely cause great harm to the many cultivators in this world. This kind of injury might not be too fatal, but it would definitely not disappear so easily. For Luo Fan, it only took a thought for him to protect them from such harm. Under such circumstances, he naturally would not be stingy with his thoughts to protect them. While he protected them, the changes in Luo Fan's body had already reached the final stage. In his body, his spirit, body, magic power, Tao fruit, perception, will, mind, thoughts, aura, sea of consciousness, and so on, everything had entered the final stage of fusion. This time, there was no disharmony that could stop this fusion. The various existences completely fused together in the end, forming an indescribable whole. It formed an unimaginably mysterious existence. A feeling of flawlessness and perfection filled his heart. In a trance, the entire universe seemed to have become a world in his palm, a world of his own, 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 a world of his own creation. There was a feeling that he could adjust the laws of the universe at will. He could adjust everything in the universe at will. There was a feeling that he was omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in the universe. Is this the feeling of chaotic origin Tao fruit? Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes and murmured. At this moment, his eyes flashed with an indescribable light that seemed to contain all the principles of the universe. It contained the supreme profundity that could allow any cultivator to comprehend for a lifetime, and it contained the supreme profundity that could lead a cultivator to the highest realm. With a slight thought, the demonic aura that surged out from the gap of the huge door instantly condensed into a small, palm-sized world of aura in front of him. It was the same as before at the center of the vortex. The aura that enveloped the huge door was the same as the world of aura. There were also 54 places that were suspected to be the aura of the demonic world. As the countless auras condensed, a huge amount of aura began to seep out from the huge door again. At this moment, Luo Fan gently patted the door, and the endless information was instantly blocked. It completely stayed in the door and could no longer flow out. It was as if the gap of the huge door had completely disappeared. The current Luo Fan was like a true sage in this universe. He was omniscient, omniscient, and omnipotent. These auras were the auras of the demonic world. But after all, they had appeared in this universe, so they were naturally under his control. He could naturally condense them into a world of aura at will, and he could naturally block the gap of the huge door so that the auras could no longer flow in. The reason why he could have such a power that was close to that of a true sage in this universe was very simple. Because this universe, in essence, it was only a great thousand world. Although it was many times more powerful and terrifying than the many great thousand worlds that Luo Fan had seen before, it was still a great thousand world after all. Compared to a true perfect world, it was still many times worse. And for Luo Fan, who had already integrated everything into one, there was no longer any difference between his divine soul, physical body, magic power, aura, and so on. As long as he stayed a little longer, he would be able to control everything in this great thousand world, as if this great thousand world was created by him. The time that Luo Fan stayed in this universe was not 1 or 2 years, but hundreds of thousands of years. He had long reached the shortest time that allowed him to control everything in this universe, as if he was the creator of this universe. Therefore, he had such a remarkable ability and power in this universe, with such a method. However, it was a pity that this method was limited to this universe. After leaving this universe, he would enter other great thousand worlds. He also needed a period of time to familiarize himself with it before he could use it again. And it was absolutely impossible for him to enter a perfect world like the Earth universe. The perfect world had exceeded the scope of effect of this strange characteristic of his. However, he had to raise his cultivation realm by a few levels before he could make use of this trait. If he wanted to make use of this trait perfectly, to the point where he could be omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in a perfect world like the vast thousand worlds for a period of time, he would have to at least attain the fruit of origin of Tao. Luo Fan floated there, raised his hand, and gently shook it. In the depths of his divine soul, the invisible and intangible sage imprint that could not be touched, grasped, or affected at all appeared in his hand. The complexity and profundity of this sage imprint was hundreds of millions of times more powerful than his Taoist imprint. Even in the hands of Luo Fan, the mysterious aura that radiated from the imprint had already enveloped the entire universe, making all living creatures in the entire universe feel a supreme and strange existence appear in a certain location in this universe. Some powerful cultivators even thought that some supreme magic treasure had appeared and were bent on finding the traces of these magic treasures. Thank you for your guidance over the years, sages and supremes. Now that I want to prove my Tao, I hope that you can take back the imprint. Luo Fan thanks you. Luo Fan let go of the imprint, which floated in the void, and he kowtowed to it in the void. For the first time, the imprint did not have any reaction, as if it was just the most ordinary imprint, just a dead object, and what Luo Fan did was just a useless effort. Luo Fan had already expected this, so he was not surprised. He kowtowed again and said, "Thank you for your guidance over the years, sages and supremes. Now that I want to prove my Tao, I hope that you can take back the imprint." Luo Fan thanks you. He repeated this process again and again, until he had repeated it 9 times. Only then did an indescribable change occur. An extremely strange sigh came from the void, and then the imprint shook slightly, gradually turning from solid to intangible. From existence to non-existence, it disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye, as if it had never appeared. The whole process was so mysterious that even Luo Fan could not imagine or understand it. The imprint was still in front of him at this moment, real and solid. There wasn't the slightest bit of illusion, but in the next instant, the brand disappeared without a trace. There were no fluctuations that he could understand in the whole process, no abnormalities in time, no changes in speed, no changes in laws. Everything was gone. From the looks of it, it was as if the brand had never been here, and the brand that he had sensed and seen for so many years was just an illusion. This change made Luo Fan instantly know that the person who took away the imprint was definitely a supreme, omnipotent, omniscient, and immortal supreme sage. He was definitely a supreme, omnipotent, omniscient, indestructible, eternally indestructible supreme saint. Of course, he did not know which sage it was. After sending the sage imprint away, Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief, and a relaxed smile appeared on his face. The existence of the imprint was actually not a bad thing for him. This was because the saint's imprint contained endless mysteries, endless principles, and also contained countless secrets of the saint's Tao. It could allow him to comprehend the mysteries of cultivation that would be of great benefit to him, and it could be of great benefit to the improvement of his Tao. Even if the imprint would cause all his thoughts to be contained in his body, all his thoughts and actions would be transmitted through the imprint to the owner of the imprint, which was the few sages. However, this was only secondary. After all, if the sage wanted to know what you were thinking, it would only take a thought. There was no need for the imprint. As for the sage imprint that could bring him a lot of benefits, the reason why Luo Fan was so determined to send it away was very simple. That was, at this moment, everything in his body had already merged into one. Whether it was his spirit, body, supernatural power, will, perception, mind, consciousness, aura, thoughts, and so on, everything had become a complete and perfect whole. Under such circumstances, the sage imprint that existed in the depths of his body was interfering with him. Even if the sage imprint could bring him endless benefits, To him, it was like a golden thorn piercing into his flesh, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. Giving a golden thorn to an ordinary person would naturally bring him many benefits. The gold used to make the golden thorn was naturally something that the person liked, but when the golden thorn pierced into the flesh, the feeling was unimaginable. No matter how valuable the golden thorn was, the person would definitely not be willing to live with a golden thorn. To the current Luo fan, the sage imprint was like a golden thorn for an ordinary person. Therefore, he wanted to send the sage imprint away. Of course, he couldn't casually throw it away. After all, it was the sage imprint and it was related to the sage. If he casually threw it away, it would be fine if the sage didn't mind. However, if the sage cared and sneezed at him, then he would die and his soul would scatter. That was the reason why the conversation from before occurred. After doing all that, Luo Fan felt relaxed. He felt that the perfect and flawless feeling was getting more and more intense. In a flash, the Air Maiden and the Divine Creation Boy appeared before him. Just now, was that the voice of the sage? After arriving, before the Air Maiden could speak, the impatient Divine Creation Boy opened his mouth to ask. This made the Air Maiden's expression change. She quickly held onto the Divine Creation Boy's hand. It was obvious that she was worried about the Air Maiden's impulsive question. That was a sage, an omnipotent sage. How could she casually talk about him? It's okay. Since the sage is willing to transmit his voice, he naturally isn't afraid of others finding out. Luo Fan couldn't help but chuckle at the Air Maiden's reaction. These words indirectly acknowledged the Divine Creation Boy's question and confirmed that the sigh from before was the sage's voice. Hearing Luo Fan's confirmation, the Air Maiden's expression changed. She couldn't help but look at Luo Fan with worry. Though hearing the sage's sigh for the first time made her feel strange and opened her eyes, because the sigh was a sigh, she became even more worried. Why did the sage sigh? What was this sigh directed at? Would something bad happen to Luo Fan, who was targeted by this sigh? Would the sage be in a bad mood because of this? Would the sage make a move against him? All these thoughts made it hard for her to pretend that nothing had happened. Seeing the Air Maiden's worried expression, Luo Fan grinned and held her hand. Don't worry. There are some things that are useless to worry about. All we can do is be ourselves. We don't have to worry about anything else. In reality, Luo Fan didn't even need to guess. The Taoist imprint that existed deep within the Air Maiden's soul would naturally let him know all of the Air Maiden's thoughts and understand all of his worries. Chapter 1206. Master, Madam, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand? The boy creation god finally couldn't help but feel depressed like a duck listening to thunder and asked. Hearing this, Luo Fan and the air hostess couldn't help but laugh. You don't need to understand. When it's time for you to understand, you will naturally understand. In the end, it was Luo Fan who comforted him. Hearing this, the Divine Creation Boy was even more puzzled. He blinked his eyes and finally didn't say anything. At this moment, Luo Fan was already a supreme existence like a sage in this universe. With a single thought, all the changes in the entire universe and all the forces were under his control. With a casual wave of his hand, the aura that pervaded the entire universe was more intense on the side of the science and technology camp, but it was extremely sparse on the side of the cultivation camp. The aura of the demonic realm that almost didn't exist instantly condensed where he was. In the blink of an eye, it completely poured into the small world of aura in his hand, making the world of aura increasingly perfect. After losing the aura of the demonic realm, the entire universe, whether it was the cultivation camp or the science and technology camp, instantly underwent a subtle change. This subtle change was as if the original great inclination towards the science and technology civilization and the cultivation camp had completely disappeared in an instant. Instead, it was replaced by an absolute balance, a balance that a normal universe and a normal heaven and earth should have. This balance caused the rejection of the science and technology civilization on the cultivation camp to completely disappear. It also caused all kinds of special help towards the development of science and technology in the star fields of the science and technology camp to completely disappear. Similarly, in the cultivation camp, in the incomparably huge star fields, a similar change also occurred. The rejection of the science and technology civilization in these regions had completely disappeared. The special help towards the cultivation civilization had also completely disappeared. In other words, the entire universe had completely returned to normal at this time. What the science and technology camp, what the cultivation camp, were just the self-perception of living beings, no longer the division of the rules of the universe. The state of the whole universe had completely become exactly the same as that of the general universe. No matter where the cultivators cultivated, when they needed to suffer a tribulation, there would be a tribulation. But similarly, when the cultivators shouldn't suffer a tribulation, the tribulation would not come. Instead, the tribulation would come. It was no longer as unimaginably strong or unimaginably weak as before. Instead, it was completely normal. In other universes, in other heavens and earth, the same cultivators would encounter the same degree of tribulations as they would encounter the same degree of tribulations. Such a huge change. For all living beings in the entire universe, this was a huge change that caught them off guard. Not only living beings, but the environment of the entire universe was also gradually changing along with this change. Many of the planets that were originally unsuitable for the birth of life, but gave birth to life due to the anomalies in the laws of the universe, were gradually transforming back to their normal state. In other words, they were gradually turning into deserts, and the life on them was gradually dying out. Similarly, in the entire universe, non-humanoid life forms began to give birth to intelligence, and all sorts of strange intelligent life forms began to rise in the universe. These kinds of changes were complicated and mysterious, and almost couldn't be described with words. Luo Fan was almost omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent in this universe. He was completely aware of such a change even before he did it. After doing all this, he did not wait for the result. He raised his hand and pointed gently, and the huge vortex collapsed in an instant. The huge amount of energy that formed the vortex gradually shrank and reorganized itself. In the end, it gradually turned into a strange fragment the size of a palm. It was impossible to tell what material this fragment was made of, and there were no special lines or other changes on it. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary stone. Luo Fan held this strange fragment and carefully stroked it. Then, an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. It's indeed a fragment of a semi-sage magic treasure. Unfortunately, it's still too small. I can't see the original appearance of that semi-sage magic treasure. Without saying much, he raised his hand and patted the fragment directly into the body of the spirit-creating boy. The spirit-creating boy was completely puzzled by what his master was doing. His little brain was working hard to think about the meaning of what his master was doing, and what kind of incredible means he was using. All of a sudden, he found that his master had suddenly patted a palm-sized, unusual thing into his body. During the whole process, he did not feel anything at all. He could not even find where the palm-sized, strange thing had gone to. This made him turn pale with fright. He touched his body and exclaimed, "Where is it? Where is it? Master, what did you put into my body?" She was so anxious that she was about to cry. Luo Fan flicked her forehead forcefully and said, "Don't be ungrateful. This is a fragment of a semi-sage magic treasure. I will now completely fuse it with your body. Your potential will increase by 100 times. You can go and snicker." Hearing Luo Fan's words, the spirit-creating boy was overjoyed. He finally stopped what he was doing and just giggled. Although the huge whirlpool had returned to its original appearance, Luo Fan did not completely eliminate the effect of the whirlpool. At this moment, the huge portal that was born because of the appearance of the whirlpool was still suspended not far away from Luo Fan. It was still huge, mysterious, and vast. The gap of the portal was still there, but it looked completely the same as before. It was just like the existence of the whirlpool. After so many changes, the divine god and the others naturally saw the root of all the changes, which was the existence of Luo Fan. The moment they saw Luo Fan, in the depths of their souls, the Tao Master imprints that they had spent a lot of time to condense completely collapsed. Then, a more complete, clearer, more stable, and more mysterious Tao Master imprint appeared in the depths of their souls, outside the origin of life. This speed was formed in an instant. Compared to before, when it took a lot of time to condense, it was much faster. The reason for this was obviously very simple. Because Luo Fan had reached true perfection at this time. He was in a flawless state. Because of this perfection, with such a flawless and unhindered state, all of his past achievements in cultivation had been influenced by various factors and had long since become extremely condensed. It was extremely real. But it was no longer as messy as before. It was because of this condensation. Therefore, the moment these practitioners saw Luo Fan, the mysteries that they could not understand naturally condensed into one. In this way, the Tao Master imprint naturally condensed in the depths of their souls. Because of this, it could be seen from the moment the Air Maiden saw Luo Fan. It should be known that the moment the Air Maiden saw Luo Fan, she had already condensed the Tao Master imprint in the depths of her soul. Before this, the Air Maiden had never seen Luo Fan after he had condensed the Tao Master imprint. Of course, this was still a Tao Master imprint after all. It was not as indestructible and immortal as the Saint imprint. Therefore, if they did not see Luo Fan for a long time and did not receive replenishment, such imprints would gradually dissipate and eventually disappear completely. This had been mentioned before, so there was no need to talk about it here. Many practitioners now faced Luo Fan. The reverence in their hearts was many times stronger than before. There was a faint feeling of facing the supreme absolute truth or the great Tao. That kind of reverence, that kind of fear, that kind of desire to approach, but also fear in their hearts, and that kind of mentality of not daring to approach, made them stay quietly on the side, not daring to speak before Luo Fan summoned them. Luo Fan glanced at them, raised his hand and gently grabbed them. They were collected into the aura world in his palm. After collecting them, he turned to the Air Maiden and said, "You still need to go into seclusion to sort out your worldview. It's not good to delay any longer. Go back first." The Air Maiden naturally did not care. She nodded and gestured to the Divine Creation Boy. The Divine Creation Boy nodded and turned around, turning into an extremely simple and ordinary creation shrine. The current creation shrine had undergone some very subtle changes compared to before. It faintly felt more stable and more unfathomable. This was obviously the change caused by the integration of the fragment of the semi-sage magic treasure that Luo Fan had obtained. Seeing this, the Air Maiden glanced at Luo Fan, turned around, took a step, and instantly entered the creation shrine. After the Air Maiden entered, the creation shrine shook slightly. It was about to turn back into the Divine Creation Boy. Luo Fan smiled slightly and said, "You should also cultivate in seclusion." With that, he raised his hand and pointed. The creation shrine shook slightly, gradually shrank to the size of a palm, and fell into Luo Fan's hand. Holding the creation shrine in one hand and the palm-sized aura world in the other, Luo Fan shook his head, raised his hand, and collected them into his universe in his sleeve. He didn't even want to leave the sage's imprint in his body, so naturally he wouldn't integrate other things into his body like before. Since this was the case, the only thing he could do now was, of course, to put these things into the universe in his sleeve. Fortunately, after that transformation, at this moment, Luo Fan's universe in his sleeve had already become a vast and boundless world. Even if it was very different from this universe, There weren't so many planets and creatures, but in essence there wasn't too much difference. Such a universe in his sleeve, even if it contained the divine creation boy and the others, it wouldn't be too bad. After doing all this, Luo Fan raised his head and looked somewhere in the void, and said faintly, "This friend has been hiding for so long, I wonder if you can show yourself now?" His words spread out, but the surroundings were silent, there was no movement at all. It was as if his words were completely spoken to the void, not to any intelligence, cultivator, or creature at all. If it was an ordinary person, they might wonder if their senses were wrong. But obviously, Luo Fan wasn't an ordinary cultivator, let alone an ordinary person. Seeing that there was no change in the surroundings, he shook his head and sighed, then raised his hand and gently patted the void. In an instant the entire universe shook slightly, and an indescribable strange wave was born from every inch of the void in the entire universe. It quickly gathered towards the void that his palm was facing, and in the blink of an eye, that void was torn apart, turning that void into a paste. The indescribable chaos, and even the strange gray existence in the gap between heaven and earth and chaos, completely drowned that void. I didn't expect you to only be at the peak of the sage to be. Unexpectedly, you can already find me. It seems that I've still underestimated you. At this moment, in that state of paste, there was such a voice full of infinite magnetism, containing endless charm, that almost made people's minds tremble naturally. They were attracted by this voice. They could even construct an incomparably perfect and beautiful male voice in their minds. As this voice appeared, the glue-like state instantly calmed down. The entire process seemed to have stopped in that instant, and there would not be any flow at all. Then, it was as if time flowed backward. That state of paste quickly transformed back to its original state of nothingness, and in a short while, it completely returned to the state of incomparably calm nothingness that it was when Luo Fan patted it. However, compared to the original state of absolute nothingness, at this moment there was something else there. It was a human figure, a figure in a long robe, with eyebrows like swords, and eyes that seemed to contain the birth and destruction of countless worlds and universes. This person's appearance was perfect to the extreme. If it was said that anyone who heard that voice before would construct an incomparably perfect male appearance in their minds, then when they saw this man's appearance, they would instantly disperse the perfect male that they had constructed, and let this man's figure replace the image that they had constructed. This was because the image that they had constructed was far inferior to this man's true appearance. Luo Fan looked at the man and faintly smiled. He then bowed and said, "I was able to comprehend many mysteries of cultivation from the silhouette you left behind. I thank you for your help. Back then, I left traces in countless worlds, and you're the only one who could gain enlightenment from them. This is your ability, so what does it have to do with me?" The figure chuckled and said, This figure was impressively the one who had left a figure lying on its side in this universe, allowing Luo Fan to witness the birth and death of countless worlds, as well as the birth and death of countless living beings. Moreover, with the help of the mysterious figure, he had deduced the mirror-like rune that was the owner of the shadow. Of course, the moment Luo Fan saw this figure, he also knew that this figure was not the original body of the figure. At most, it was an incarnation or a clone or even a projection. There was no other reason. Although this figure contained the same aura and the same mysteries as the figure, it was only equivalent to an existence that had set foot on the fourth or fifth step. Although this strength was slightly stronger than Luo Fan before, compared to the current Luo Fan, it did not have much of an advantage. If Luo Fan was almost omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in this universe, it was even more impossible for him to compare. With such strength, of course, it was impossible for this figure to be the original body of the figure. No matter what, I have benefited from you, fellow. I will remember this in my heart. May I know how to address you, fellow? Luo Fan only smiled, and did not conveniently let the matter go just because the figure said that it was not a kindness. Instead, he said this. Haha, you're a very interesting person. What I'm called is actually not important. You can call me the Honorable One. You should be called Luofan. I've observed you for more than 100,000 years, but I really can't figure out how you cultivate and how you can grasp this universe so quickly. Can you tell me? The Honorable One said. When Luofan heard this, he just smiled and said, So it turns out that fellow Taoist Jingzuan was already here when I was cultivating with the help of the traces you left behind. I only discovered fellow Taoist's existence not long ago. I am truly ashamed. As for how I could grasp this universe so quickly, this is a secret of my cultivation that I can't tell you yet. I hope fellow Honorable One can forgive me. A cultivation secret, huh? That's going to be difficult. When the Honorable One heard Luofan's words, he could not help but sigh. On his face that could make anyone feel that he was a perfect spokesperson, he frowned slightly and muttered. It was as if he had fallen into a dilemma. At this moment, Luofan had already raised his vigilance to the highest level. He quietly stared at the figure in front of him, who called himself the Honorable One. Although his expression did not change, he was already prepared to gather the power of the entire universe to destroy him in an instant. The situation he was facing was almost the most dangerous situation he had ever encountered in his life. Even all the dangers he had encountered in the primordial world, or even in the great Tianyuan world, were nothing compared to the danger he was facing now. Chapter 1207. The reason was not because they disliked each other, but because of what the main venerate had said earlier. He had a reason that he absolutely could not give up on Luofan's cultivation method. It should be known that the traces left behind by the main venerate could deduce the runes left behind by a half-saint magic treasure from 1% to 99%. It was easy to imagine how profound the main venerate's cultivation realm was. However, under such circumstances, the main venerate could not do what Luofan could do easily. He could not control the entire universe like Luofan could, and he could not be omnipotent like a saint in the universe. With just a little thought, one should know what the main venerate was thinking. Regarding Luofan's cultivation method, the secrets of his cultivation, and even all of his thoughts and senses, it was impossible for the true sovereign to give up on them. As for Luofan, he would naturally not be stingy if he only wanted his own cultivation method. However, if the main venerate wanted his foundation to become a saint and wanted him to teach him the path to become a saint, he would have to establish an extremely deep friendship with him. If Luofan thought that it was enough to teach him the secret of becoming a saint, he would not be willing to reveal it even if he was beaten to death. It was impossible for Luofan to reveal it, but the main venerate would definitely want to know. There was clearly an irreconcilable conflict between the two. Under such an irreconcilable conflict, unless one of them gave up on their own thoughts and even gave up on their own principles, it would be impossible for them to eliminate this conflict no matter what they said. Clearly, this was the case. An existence like Luofan with a firm Tao heart would not give up on his own principles. As for the main venerate, of course, it was even more impossible for him to give up on such a powerful opportunity without exploring it. In this way, a conflict between the two was almost inevitable. No matter how many words were spoken, it wouldn't change much. In the end, the result was inevitable. The only difference might be the speed at which the conflict would occur. It was precisely because he clearly understood this that Luofan raised his vigilance to the highest at this time. The head-honored one did not make a move at this moment. He raised his head and looked at the huge door behind Luofan. "Do you know what kind of gate this is?" "I don't know. Could it be that you do?" Although Luofan knew the reason for the formation of the gate and where it led to, he really didn't know what kind of gate it was. At the very least, he didn't know what kind of gate it was. Actually, this kind of door has a name in our world. It's called the pseudo-holy door. Jingzun lifted his foot and took a light stride. His movement was not any different from that of an ordinary person, but in the blink of an eye, he had crossed a considerable distance and passed by Luo Fan. He appeared next to the huge door, raised his hand, and quietly stroked the huge door as he spoke. Luo Fan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows at the way he walked. However, it was only a slight twitch. Although this method was mysterious, it was no secret to Luo Fan. He didn't even need to be in this universe to be able to do this. Of course, he would not remain unmoved because of this. Although he could achieve such a method, it did not mean that he could give Luo Fan such a strange feeling. In fact, it was a very simple and common thing for him to be unable to interrupt his movements. The fact that he could make Luo Fan feel that he couldn't be interrupted or stopped meant that the way he walked actually contained some mysteries that were beyond Luo Fan's understanding. Otherwise, Luo Fan definitely wouldn't have this feeling of being unable to be stopped. What's the pseudo-holy door? Does this mean that one can become a pseudo-holy door after crossing this door? Luo Fan asked. Of course not. The pseudo-holy door is actually a realm that surpasses the sage-to-be. You guys call this realm the 9 steps, but we call it the pseudo-holy door. How can such a realm be achieved by crossing such a door? Jingzun chuckled. Pseudo-holy door? Luo Fan came to a sudden realization after hearing Jingzun's explanation. It turned out that the pseudo-holy door was equivalent to a cultivator who had set foot on the 9 step. In other words, the first step was equivalent to a level 1 pseudo-holy door in the demon realm. The second step was equivalent to a level 2 pseudo-holy door, and the third step was equivalent to a level 3 pseudo-holy door. In this way, those who had set foot on the 9 steps were naturally level 9 pseudo-holy door. It was just a different way of saying it, and it wasn't much different from the realms on Earth or in the universe. Then why is this door called the pseudo-holy door? Luo Fan asked doubtfully. Although he and Jingzun would definitely fall out in the end, it didn't stop them from communicating before that happened. For Luo Fan, it was what he wanted to hear more information about the demon realm from Jingzun. As for the Jingzun, he would be able to find out Luo Fan's cultivation method through this kind of communication. He would know why Luo Fan was able to do things that he couldn't even do now at this realm. This was also what he wanted. In a situation where both sides wanted to communicate, the two naturally hit it off, and there were no obstacles in their communication. Actually, you already knew. Didn't you just refine the source of this pseudo-holy door into your magic treasure? Jingzun smiled. Oh, I see. In other words, the reason why this door is called the pseudo-holy door is actually because this door is a fragment of a pseudo-holy treasure? Luo Fan suddenly said. As for Jingzun saying that he had fused the fragment into his magic treasure, he didn't feel ashamed at all. He didn't even take out the fragment that might have belonged to Jingzun and give it to him. It was as if he didn't know about this at all, and he calmly used the fragment for his own use. Fortunately, it was unknown whether Jingzun didn't care about the fragment, or if it was because the fragment was actually not Jingzun's. Seeing that Luo Fan had no intention of mentioning the fragment, he didn't mention it either. He just smiled and said, yes. In our world, there are frequent battles between pseudo-holy treasures. The number of pseudo-holy treasures destroyed is also extremely high. Generally speaking, battles that can destroy pseudo-holy treasures will collapse spacetime, so a large portion of the fragments after these pseudo-holy treasures are scattered outside of the world, appearing in various spacetimes. Because pseudo-holy treasures contain infinite mysteries, these fragments will naturally form an inexplicable connection with other fragments after entering a certain world. When this connection is strong to a certain extent, it will naturally form a pseudo-holy door like this. I see. Luo Fan heard this and came to a sudden realization. He understood the source of the appearance of this huge door. After the pseudo-holy treasure that Jingzun mentioned was shattered, a large portion would leave the demon realm and enter other worlds. However, just like pouring water into a cup from a high place, there would naturally be a lot of water splashing out of the cup due to the impact, but generally speaking, there would be more water left in the cup than splashing out. Therefore, after the pseudo-holy treasure was shattered, the fragments left in the demon realm would definitely be more than the fragments that left the demon realm and entered other world. In this way, the connection between the fragments was the strongest. Of course, it was produced between the fragments in the demon realm and the fragments in other spacetimes. When the connection was strong to a certain level, the pseudo-holy door that was produced would, of course, communicate between the spacetime and the demon realm. Based on this, the huge whirlpool in a certain spacetime that Luo Fan saw in the Divine Son's memory was connected to the demon realm, and why it could communicate with the demon realm and spit out so many creatures. The reason was obvious. It was simply because the fragments there were relatively small, and the connection between the fragments was not strong enough to form a pseudo-holy door, which was why it could only form such an abnormal phenomenon. Taoist fellow might have missed out on the level of this pseudo-holy treasure. It must at least reach a certain level to be able to form such a pseudo-holy door. For example, level 9 pseudo-holy treasure or beyond level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. Luo Fan said with a slight smile. There is indeed a requirement for the level. However, it's not that only level 9 pseudo-holy treasure is enough to form a pseudo-holy door. In fact, as long as it's a pseudo-holy treasure of level 7 or 8, it's already qualified. Jing Zun said with a smile. Then what level is this pseudo-holy treasure? Luo Fan asked with a slight smile. The level of this pseudo-holy treasure is only at the peak of level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. It's still a bit away from surpassing level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. Jing Zun said with some regret. From this point of view, could it be that Taoist fellow is the owner of this pseudo-holy treasure? Luo Fan asked with a smile. When the main body heard this, he only smiled and didn't answer. He said, "If you want to enter our world through this door, the place you appear on the other side will be a battlefield. A battlefield formed by a life and death battle between two level 9 pseudo-holy treasures. Although that battle happened trillions of years ago, there were still powerful shockwaves lingering in the air even now. Although you control this universe, it's impossible for you to bring this universe over. If you appear there, the aftershocks of the battle will completely wipe you out." Is that so? Luo Fan's heart tightened when he heard this. However, he did not panic to the point of giving up on his plan. When he heard that this door was formed by the connection between the fragments, and that the location of the connection was also the location of the other fragment, Luo Fan already had such a guess. He roughly knew that behind this space-time door was that battlefield. However, he did not think that the aftershocks of the battle might still remain until now. After all, this universe had been changed for hundreds of billions of years, and even the universe's century had changed several times. This meant that the pseudo-holy treasure had been shattered at least hundreds of billions of years ago. Under such circumstances, no matter how intense the battle was, the aftershocks of the battle should have dissipated. Now that he heard the words of the Jing Zun, he realized that he had still underestimated the level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. Thinking about it, this venerable one had appeared in this universe billions of years ago, and the traces left behind were still there. They were still displaying unimaginable power, allowing him to comprehend many unimaginable mysteries. The terrifying battle in which the level 9 pseudo-sage erupted with his strongest power and even shattered the pseudo-sage treasure. How could the aftershocks not remain until now? It was because of this that he did not think that the Zheng Zun was exaggerating to scare him. He did not think that those words were lies. However, even though he knew this, he did not think that he had no chance at all. After all, it was only the aftershocks of a battle that happened hundreds of billions of years ago. No matter how strong it was, it should have weakened by now. Even if he could not resist it directly, he could make some preparations and put up some defenses. there was still a chance that he could resist it. Thank you for your reminder, fellow Taoist. I'll be careful. Luo Fan did not show his worries on the surface. He just smiled and bowed to the Jingzun. Could it be that fellow Taoist still thinks that you can safely enter our world? The Jingzun could tell what Luo Fan was thinking when he saw Luo Fan's reaction, and he could not help but laugh. I have to give it a try. Now that things have come to this, if I give up a plan that has been planned for hundreds of thousands of years, just because of your words, I won't have to cultivate anymore. Then I don't need to cultivate anymore, Luo Fan said with a smile. I see. It seems that fellow Taoist's Tao heart is really firm. It's a pity that the supreme cultivation technique that fellow Taoist created is going to be lost, the Jingzun sighed. Fellow Taoist worries too much. I won't throw away my life. Before entering, I will naturally make a lot of preparations. Luo Fan was on high alert. He knew that this was the final time to reveal the signboard, and his face was full of smiles. His face was full of smiles, but his eyes flashed with a dignified glint. It's always good to make some preparations. How about this? Fellow Taoist gives me the supreme cultivation technique that you created. If nothing happens to fellow Taoist, I will return it to fellow Taoist. If anything happens to fellow Taoist, I will pass it on fellow Taoist's behalf. How about it? The Jingzun laughed. There's no need to trouble fellow Taoist. The cultivation technique that I created is only a crude one. It doesn't matter if I pass it on or not. Who knows, if I pass it on, it might mislead others. It might be better to cut off the inheritance, Luo Fan said plainly. At this moment, he no longer had any smile on his face. Is that so? I am very interested in such a crude cultivation technique. I won't hide it from fellow Taoists. This pseudo-sage treasure was indeed refined by me. The place of battle is also the place where I fought against my enemies. I believe that with my abilities, it won't be a problem to protect fellow Taoist to safely pass through that area. How about I protect fellow Taoist to safely enter our world, and fellow Taoist impart the supreme cultivation technique that you created to me? The Jingzun still smiled. Ai. Luo Fan sighed. He didn't say anything and only lightly shook his head. It's a pity. My heart is towards the moon, but the moon shines on the ditch. The Jingzun looked at Luo Fan's determined expression. Although he had already expected this, he still couldn't help but feel helpless. His every word and action was to exert pressure on Luo Fan. He wanted to make Luo Fan surrender in the end, and make him believe that without his help, Luo Fan would definitely not be able to enter the demon world safely. However, he didn't expect that Luo Fan would be so determined. It seemed that Luo Fan was hiding some kind of trump card. He wasn't even afraid of the aftermath of the battle between the pseudo-sage level 9 and was completely unaffected by the pressure in his heart. This made him feel a little helpless. At the same time, he was even more interested in Luo Fan's cultivation technique. What kind of trump card was it that made this peak sage to be so confident that he could stay safe in the aftermath of the battle between the pseudo-sage level 9? What would happen if he obtained such a trump card? At the thought of this, he couldn't help but feel an inexplicable excitement. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that there was no way to delay things any longer. He didn't speak anymore and directly raised his hand to slap the Jingzun. This slap looked extremely ordinary, just like a casual slap from an ordinary person. However, with this slap, the Jingzun's expression changed slightly. With a wave of his hand, a three-legged round cauldron appeared above his head. With a slight tremble, the entire universe started to shake violently. The surrounding laws and rules completely collapsed in an instant. Along with the collapse of these laws and rules, the countless layers of abyss above, the crystal wall world, and the entire crystal wall system also collapsed. In the blink of an eye, this place that originally belonged to the center of the universe, a place that was not affected even by the cosmic war between the technology camp and the cultivation camp, was completely destroyed, and transformed into a scene that looked like paste. The crystal wall system that originally existed here, which was formed by the numerous crystal wall worlds, completely turned into nothingness. Along with this crystal wall system turning into nothingness, an unimaginably large number of living creatures within the crystal wall system, as well as the last remnants of the supreme divine land, the stubborn power of the technology camp. Amidst this glue-like scene, an incomparably huge door gradually materialized from nothingness, from illusion to reality, and gradually appeared in the midst of the paste. This door was unimaginably huge. Even a star in front of it was like sand in front of an ordinary door. The entire door was extremely stable. Even the intense changes in the surroundings were like seawater to a reef. No matter how intense and violent the changes in the surroundings were, they couldn't affect the door in the slightest. Right in front of this door, a handsome man with a three-legged cauldron hovered quietly in the air above his head. In front of this man, a man who looked like an ordinary person without any abnormal aura raised his hand towards the man with the three-legged round cauldron above his head. Chapter 1208. The two of them were naturally Luo Fan and the main world Venerate. At that moment, the two of them faced each other. The main world Venerate's expression was extremely calm, while Luo Fan's expression seemed to have come to a sudden realization. "So, it's a dome," he muttered. In an instant, he sensed that the rune that he had obtained was unimaginably complex and profound, but no matter what, he was still short of almost 1% of its profundities. He was unable to deduce it completely, and that rune that could not be perfected instantly appeared before his eyes. Then, the rune that looked like a mirror suddenly collapsed and transformed. Although it was still the same rune, the entire image had changed from the mirror into a three-legged cauldron. On the other hand, the 1% that was originally missing, which made the rune incomplete, was naturally filled up, making the rune complete and flawless. As the rune was completed, a strange aura enveloped Luo Fan, causing Luo Fan to have an extremely stable and suppressive aura. This was not Luo Fan's aura. He had concealed his aura extremely well and did not reveal even the slightest bit, so how could his aura leak out? This aura was, in fact, the aura of the three-legged cauldron-shaped rune. In other words, it was the aura of the pseudo-sage treasure itself. Facing the changes in Luo Fan's body, the main body's expression couldn't help but slightly change. He said, "I didn't expect you to be able to complete the runes on my magic treasure. This is really beyond my expectations." As he spoke, the faint desire in his eyes became more and more obvious. That was for sure. Luo Fan could actually deduce the missing 1% of his runes so quickly. This was enough to show how outstanding his comprehension was. Since his comprehension ability was so outstanding, then the cultivation technique that he created was likely to be even more exquisite. Naturally, it made him want to obtain it even more. Luo Fan didn't answer the head Venerate's question. He raised his hand and pointed. The rune instantly appeared in front of him. One was very similar to the three-legged cauldron above the main body's head, but it appeared more illusory and smaller. The three-legged round cauldron appeared in front of him, which seemed to be much more exquisite. After all, this three-legged cauldron was just a rune, and it was deduced and completed by Luo Fan himself. Naturally, it couldn't be compared with the real pseudo-divine treasure. It was already extremely commendable to form such a three-legged cauldron at this level. It was impossible to compare it with the three-legged cauldron. What a pity! This is just a pseudo-sage treasure that you refined a few trillion years ago. Compared to your current magic treasure, it is still far inferior. Luo Fan sighed and raised his hand to pat it lightly. Boundless energy from the entire universe was gathering towards this location. This power was not used to attack the head Venerate, but was completely condensed and poured into the three-legged cauldron in front of him. This three-legged cauldron was originally just an illusory rune, but after receiving so much power, it began to become real at an astonishing speed. However, it started to become real at an astonishing speed, gradually turning from its original illusory appearance into a real three-legged cauldron. The extremely stable aura that suppressed everything became denser and denser. After a while, when the power that was enough to completely destroy a star domain of hundreds of millions of light-years was completely condensed in this three-legged cauldron, the three-legged cauldron shuddered and took on a completely substantial form. It became a real artifact. Unfortunately, although that mysterious rune was deduced by Luo Fan based on the pseudo-sage treasure, it was only a rune after all. An artifact condensed from this rune could not directly become a pseudo-sage treasure in a single step. It needed a long period of tempering before it could advance and approach the level of a pseudo-sage treasure step by step. According to Luo Fan's deduction, such a long period of time would take at least trillions of years. Now, although this three-legged cauldron exuded such a powerful aura and looked so terrifying in front of Luo Fan, it was only equivalent to a magic artifact. Although this magic artifact might have 1 or 2% of the power of the pseudo-sage treasure, it was still a magic artifact after all. Its essence was still many times inferior to a magic artifact. Luo Fan held the three-legged cauldron and let out a slight sigh. Normally, he might want to set up a space-time array like when he was refining the creation shrine and accelerate the flow of time to an incredible degree, so that this magic artifact could truly become a pseudo-sage treasure or even reach the height of pseudo-sage level 9. The rune used by this magic artifact was the rune of a pseudo-sage level 9 magic artifact, so it naturally had the potential to grow to that height without needing Luo Fan to control it. However, this was obviously not an ordinary time. Now, a pseudo-sage level 9, which was a powerful existence who had set foot on the 9th step, was in front of him. If Luo Fan were to arrange that formation again, he would be sending himself to the butcher's knife without any ability to resist. He would definitely be courting death. Luo Fan obviously wouldn't do such a thing. As such, he could only glance at the magic tool with a hint of regret before raising his hand and sending the magic tool toward the main body. The three-legged cauldron was densely covered with countless ancient and strange lines, as if it was outlining the great Tao, and also as if it was outlining all the mysteries of the universe. The suppressive aura it emitted was integrated with the entire universe. It was as if all the changes were supported by the entire universe, and everything that was suppressed by it would be suppressed by the entire universe. At this moment, Luo Fan sent the three-legged cauldron to the main body. Of course, it was not to give it to him, but to use the power of the three-legged cauldron to completely suppress the main body. Although the three-legged cauldron was only a magic artifact at this moment, compared to the one condensed above the main body. Compared to the phantom of the pseudo-sage treasure, its level was billions of times lower. However, compared to the pseudo-sage treasure, the three-legged cauldron had an advantage. That was the universe. Luo Fan could be almost omnipotent like a saint in this universe. To him, even if the three-legged cauldron was only a magic artifact, under his control and the support of the universe, it could unleash power that far exceeded the level of a magic artifact. It might even be comparable to the pseudo-sage treasure from before. Such a powerful artifact was best used to attack the incarnation or projection of the Venerable One. The main body looked at the three-legged cauldron that emitted a powerful suppressive aura as it flew towards him, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. He raised his hand and pointed gently, and the three-legged cauldron above his head instantly flew forward, colliding with the three-legged cauldron that Luo Fan was controlling. Although the three-legged cauldron that the main body controlled was launched later, it seemed to be flying forward normally. However, during this process, Luo Fan felt that the entire universe had been enveloped by the three-legged cauldron, and no matter where he dodged, he could not escape the suppression of the three-legged cauldron. This kind of feeling made him secretly sigh. This is the atmosphere that a person who has stepped on the stairs should have when using a pseudosage treasure. Although the power of the three-legged round cauldron is amazing. Although the three-legged cauldron that he was controlling was powerful, it did not have such an effect because its level was not high enough. However, although it was inferior in terms of aura, Luo Fan did not have any intention of giving up. He smiled and raised his hand gently. The three-legged cauldron that he controlled began to spin, and the suppressive aura seemed to have gained the value of the universe. It suddenly skyrocketed 100 times. This suppressive aura was so strong that it had even reached the level of condensing a world of aura in the outside world. The three-legged cauldron seemed to be wrapped in a mysterious world, and it collided with the three-legged cauldron that was controlled by the main body. It looked like a vast and mysterious world was colliding with it. This was because Luo Fan knew that he could not compare to the main body in that kind of aura, so he simply did not care about it, and directly released the power contained in the three-legged cauldron without any scruples. The two three-legged cauldrons collided with each other in an instant. In an instant, the entire universe shook violently, and countless stars began to shake violently as if they were being held by a big hand at this moment. The surroundings, which had gradually calmed down, instantly reappeared in an even more ferocious state. The area it covered was even more exaggerated than before. God knows how many river systems were completely destroyed in the process, turning into a glue-like state. This was a change in breadth and depth. This time, not only were the laws and principles being minced apart, even the void was completely shattered by the impact. Through the grayish, glue-like state, one could even see an incomparably mysterious, abstruse, and mysterious great Tao looming in the depths like a long river. This was nothing else, but a scene that would appear when the boundary between the unseen and reality was broken. During this process, the massive gate that led to the demon realm did not change at all. It was completely unaffected by the terrifying changes, and it looked as if the changes in the surroundings were just illusions. Similar to the door were Luo Fan and the true sovereign. They were also extremely calm and composed amidst the grayish state that was like paste. It was as if they were completely separated from the changes in their surroundings and were completely unaffected by the changes in their surroundings. Unfortunately, it's still a little lacking. Luo Fan sighed. He casually waved his hand, and countless tiny fragments gathered in the air, forming a three-legged cauldron that was covered in countless cracks in front of him. When the two three-legged cauldrons collided, the true sovereign's three-legged cauldron had erupted with terrifying power, directly shattering Luo Fan's three-legged cauldron into countless fragments. Although the three-legged round cauldron shadow of the main body had also shattered during this process, it must be known that the main body's three-legged round cauldron was only a shadow, while Luo Fan's three-legged round cauldron was a true magic tool that had been refined. Moreover, it was a magic tool that had received the blessing of the entire universe. In such an outcome that was close to mutual destruction, it was obvious who would emerge victorious and who would lose. At this moment, an invisible arm swept to both sides. The glue-like state within a few light-years around the huge door completely calmed down, and the star territory became calm and normal again. It seemed as if nothing unusual had happened here. Then, the true sovereign's figure appeared in front of Luo Fan. He raised his hand and pressed it against the three-legged cauldron. Crack! The cauldron completely collapsed, and it was even to the extent that the profound talisman markings that formed the cauldron completely collapsed along with it. They transformed into countless fine fragments once more before vanishing without a trace in the end. After these changes, Luo Fan finally reacted. He raised his hand and waved it gently. A red light flashed and wrapped around the true sovereign in front of him. Space-time, nomological rules, and even the void around the red light showed signs of melting as the red light appeared. It was as if they were being corroded. A very good light of extinction. It's a pity that you still don't know how strong a true pseudo-sage is. The true sovereign praised and gently tore it with his hands. The red light that could even corrode the void was instantly torn apart by him. The red light, which was originally invisible and intangible, seemed to have turned into countless pieces of rubies, splashing and scattering in all directions. Drop by drop, they disappeared without a trace, but they did not dissipate. Instead, they broke through space-time and went to a random place far away from here. Perhaps there, they would cause extremely terrifying damage. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. What happened to him? There were many cultivators who had set foot on the steps, but none of them had ever been able to display the means that the true sovereign had displayed at this moment. For the other cultivators who had set foot on the steps, they mostly relied on their magic treasures, which were the pseudo-sage treasures that the true sovereign had mentioned. They constantly stimulated the power of the magic treasures to achieve their various goals. The power that he had displayed before had the power of extinction. Even the red light that could corrode the unseen world was cast to counter this characteristic of theirs. After all, for cultivators who relied more on magic treasures to fight, their use of the body, no matter what, would be somewhat deficient. This deficiency only applied to cultivators of their level. For cultivators of other levels, it was a deficiency. Their use of the body was certainly superb. However, a deficiency was a deficiency. As long as one targeted the body, one would naturally be able to obtain a stronger advantage than against magic treasures. However, he did not expect that the true sovereign's body had almost the same characteristics as a magic treasure. At that moment, Luo Fan felt that the red light was not torn apart by the hands of the human body, but as if it was completely crushed by the three-legged cauldron. Unity of man and treasure? Luo Fan asked. He raised his hand, and the endless red light in the void formed a three-legged cauldron that suppressed the true sovereign. When the true sovereign heard Luo Fan say that the unity of man and treasure was achieved, his eyes slightly brightened. He said, "You are indeed not simple to actually be able to see this. However, although it is somewhat close, your guess is still wrong." As he spoke, he raised his hand and formed a fist seal, which he blasted towards Luo Fan's face. This attack did not seem to have any abnormalities on the outside, and there were no special changes, but Luo Fan, who was enveloped by this fist seal, felt as if he was being crushed by countless heavens and earth. It was as if when this fist seal imprinted on his body, he would instantly be crushed by countless heavens and earth's power, and not even a trace of matter or power would be left behind. Such a fist imprint was truly terrifying. Even though Luo Fan felt that he had no flaws at all, he still couldn't help but feel fearful. I guessed wrong? Then what is the correct one? At this moment, he even had the mind to ask this question. As he spoke, he directly used the three-legged cauldron condensed from the endless red light to appear in front of the true sovereign's fist seal and directly wrapped around the fist seal. The true sovereign's fist seal shook, and countless small cracks instantly appeared on the three-legged cauldron that was formed from the red light. It looked as if it had already been broken once, but had only been pieced back together by someone extremely patient and attentive. The sound's penetrative power was beyond imagination, and could even be heard by star regions that were trillions of light-years away in the universe. Such a terrifying sound could only be heard when the world was being destroyed. Moreover, it wasn't just the destruction of a single world, but the instantaneous destruction of hundreds and thousands of worlds. In the end, the three-legged cauldron that was formed from the red light completely collapsed. Compared to before, the ruby-like fragments that were even more condensed and numerous scattered in all directions, directly penetrating through space and time, and burrowing into a completely unfamiliar place. However, the true sovereign, who had destroyed the three-legged cauldron, also lost his power in his fist seal. He could only stop in the void, and could not smash the fist seal onto Luo Fan's face. You want to know? It's not difficult for me to tell you, as long as you use your own cultivation method to exchange for it, the true sovereign said as he retracted his fist seal. However, He clearly did not think that Luo Fan would agree. As he spoke, he took a light step forward, and his figure was like an ordinary martial arts expert fighting. There were no special flashes of light or any special changes, and his figure had already appeared beside Luo Fan, who had just dodged. He raised his hand to form a palm seal, and slammed it towards Luo Fan's chest. Chapter 1209. Facing such a palm print, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. He raised his hand and formed a fist seal to block the incoming palm print. This palm print was completely different from the one that the main venerate had formed, but it also contained boundless mysteries. This time, the palm print not only received the blessing of the entire universe, but it also broke through the unseen and entered the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. It drew down the endless gray existence and formed the power of the palm print, causing the palm print to gradually emit a majestic aura that did not belong to heaven and earth but could suppress and destroy everything. It even spread out, causing the entire universe to tremble along with the existence of this aura. Although this aura was so powerful that it far surpassed the boundaries of heaven and earth, due to the nature of the aura itself, it did not form a world of aura. Instead, it destroyed and suppressed everything. Wherever it passed, space-time became chaotic, the layers of laws were destroyed, and the unseen world was distorted. Even the great Tao seemed to naturally retreat because of the existence of this palm print. The two palm prints collided at a speed that surpassed the speed of time. Not a single sound was heard. However, at this moment, the layers of laws in the entire universe seemed to become chaotic. Everywhere in the universe, countless stars and planets were instantly destroyed. An indescribable sense of destruction enveloped the entire universe, enveloping the minds of all living beings in the universe, causing all living beings in the universe to feel a sense of despair emanating from the bottom of their hearts. This change was extremely obvious. It was clear that the entire universe could not withstand the impact of the aftermath of their battle. It was plunging into the abyss of destruction. This situation was nothing for the main venerate. He did not show any abnormal emotions or any change in his expression because of this. However, it was different for Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan was not a Buddha who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind, he would not feel sorry for the destruction of the universe. However, one should not forget that at this moment, the reason why he could fight evenly with the main venerate was because of this universe. The reason why he could fight evenly with the main venerate was because of this universe. It was because he could receive the unreserved blessing of the universe, and he could become omnipotent like a supreme saint in the universe. If he lost this universe, he would still be powerful. He would still be countless times stronger than peak quasi-saints. He might even be comparable to pseudo-saints who had set foot on the third or fourth step. However, compared to the projection of the main venerate, who was at least a level 9 pseudo-saint, he would not be able to resist at all. This was because this universe was so important. When he sensed that the universe was about to be destroyed, Luo Fan could not help but feel his heart skip a beat and his expression changed slightly. Just the aftermath of the palm imprints that the two of them had sent out earlier had caused the entire universe to fall into the abyss of complete destruction. One could imagine how strong the impact of such a change was. As the two palm prints collided, all kinds of strange lights scattered in all directions. Endless worlds were born, destroyed, born again, and destroyed again. The two of them seemed to be at the center of the universe, sitting and watching the endless worlds around them constantly being born and destroyed. The birth and destruction of these worlds and universes were not absolutely controlled by Luo Fan and the Venerable One. Instead, they were distributed in a very strange way. Sometimes Luo Fan controlled the birth, and sometimes it was the other way around. Together, they evolved the scene of the birth and destruction of the universe. This scene covered a radius of several dozen light years, directly transforming this area into an extremely strange and wonderful place, forming a wonderful place that could not be described with words. The palm print that Luo Fan and the main Venerate had sent out seemed to have obtained true intelligence. They did not need to be controlled by the two of them, and they naturally began to fight instinctively. The transformation between the birth and destruction of the universe was the result of the instinctive battle between the two palm prints. If all kinds of battle wisdom were completely sorted out, it would probably be enough to make any ordinary creature become a god of war. It would be enough to be used as a battle Bible by any world, any heaven, and any universe. After all, Luo Fan had received the support of the entire universe. Although his palm print could not compare to the main Venerates in terms of ability, it was still extremely exquisite and mysterious. The combination of the two allowed his palm print to gain the upper hand in the battle. This reflected the scene of the universe. The nature of the universe was gradually changing, and it gradually crushed towards the main Venerate. It was about to crush the main Venerate completely in the universe. The battle between their palm prints was a battle that completely transcended time and space. From the moment they sent out their palms to the moment the outcome was revealed, it happened almost at the same time. When the final result came out, Luo Fan's worry about the destruction of the entire universe hadn't even been completely resolved. The outcome was that the universe crashed into the main Venerate in the end. Everything shattered and disappeared without a trace, however, although it seemed like Luo Fan had the absolute upper hand, and even the palm print landed on the main Venerate, it did not affect the main Venerate much in the end. It did not even make him spit out a mouthful of blood. It only made his expression change slightly. This was not because the power of Luo Fan's palm print was weak. Instead, it was because the main Venerate's palm print had mostly neutralized the power of the palm print. Naturally, it could not affect the main Venerate much since his essence was so high. Although it did not affect him much, it was still a slight advantage. Luo Fan took advantage of this opportunity to raise his hand and grab at the void. He reached into the gap between the universe and the state of chaos, and grabbed a large cluster of gray existences that were almost the size of stars. This was the most gray existence that Luo Fan had grabbed from the gap between the universe and the state of chaos ever since he found out about the existence of the gap between the universe and the state of chaos. As soon as so many gray existences appeared, they naturally spread throughout the universe. They wanted to assimilate the entire universe into gray existences and destroy it completely. Faced with this, Luo Fan raised his hand and directly sent a rune that looked like a three-legged cauldron into the gray existence. This three-legged cauldron was already somewhat different from the rune that he had obtained from the main Venerate. The change was extremely subtle. It was extremely mysterious, but it did not cause the rune's power to increase by a large margin. On the contrary, this change caused the power of the talisman to be greatly reduced. After all, the rune that looked like a three-legged cauldron had been created by the main Venerate after cultivating for God knows how many years. It had already reached an almost perfect state. If he wanted to make it more profound and mysterious, it would take at least tens of thousands of years for Luo Fan to achieve it with his cultivation realm. At this moment, he had only obtained the complete rune for such a short period of time. It was naturally impossible for him to truly achieve it. However, even though the power of the rune itself had been reduced by a little because of his changes, such a change was still very effective. However, it wasn't just a simple reduction in power. Because of such a change, this was the compatibility between the rune and the gray existence. It had already increased by tens of thousands of times. This kind of compatibility made it so that if a gray, hazy existence was used to construct this three-legged cauldron, even if it was only a magic tool, it would not be able to withstand it. However, it was still tens of thousands of times more powerful than the three-legged cauldron that Luo Fan had constructed in the beginning. Such an increase in strength was obviously enough to change the outcome of the battle. After the three-legged cauldron-like rune entered the grayish existence, it started to absorb the grayish existence like a black hole. In the blink of an eye, all of the grayish existence was sucked into the three-legged cauldron, causing a solid three-legged cauldron to appear in front of Luo Fan. As soon as the three-legged cauldron appeared, the aura that could suppress everything swept across the entire universe, directly interrupting the process of the universe that was heading towards the abyss of destruction. It was like a broken mirror that had been completely frozen in amber. When Luo Fan sensed this change, he was slightly surprised. This change was beyond his expectations. He had not constructed this three-legged cauldron to suppress the entire universe and stop it from being destroyed, but to suppress his opponents. He had not expected that the aura that the three-legged cauldron emitted would be enough to create such an effect, completely interrupting the process of the entire universe's destruction. Faced with such an unexpected gain, he could only rejoice. What is this? This isn't power, it's not space-time, it's not a law, it's not a law. At that moment, an extremely shocked expression appeared on the patriarch's face. He stood there and looked at the three-legged cauldron that Luo Fan had condensed. His mouth was agape and his eyes were filled with disbelief. The rune that formed the three-legged round cauldron was something he had created over billions of years of cultivation. He was even more familiar with the three-legged round cauldron than he was with his own body. However, at this moment, he discovered that there was a change in the rune that he could not understand at all. In fact, he couldn't even see through the strange existence that formed this three-legged cauldron. He didn't even know what kind of existence it was. How could he not be shocked and curious about this powerful existence that had become a pseudo-saint countless years ago? I was right to come this time, he murmured, trying his best to explore all the mysteries of the three-legged cauldron. It was a pity that although he was extremely powerful, and this projection alone was enough to make Luo Fan run around for his life, almost destroying the entire universe. However, he did not have his own independent worldview. Without his own independent worldview, it was impossible for him to have the perspective that came with an independent worldview, and it was impossible for him to discover that there was an indescribable gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. Since he couldn't discover the gap, he naturally couldn't know what kind of existence this gray, hazy existence was. Just like a blind man, even if he touched an elephant, he wouldn't know what the elephant really looked like. From his point of view, this grayish existence was something that was completely beyond his senses. Even the chaos that he comprehended during his daily cultivation seemed to only be a part of this existence. The more the main hall master sensed and probed this strange change, the more shocked he became. Luo Fan naturally did not care how shocked he was or how he probed. He raised his hand and pointed at the main hall master. As he pointed, the three-legged round cauldron trembled slightly and slowly floated towards the main hall master. That's right, it was not charging or crashing, but floating. The three-legged round cauldron was like a balloon in the water. It seemed to be very difficult for it to stay in the water. Then, under the influence of the violent force, it slowly floated towards the projection of the level 9 pseudo-sage. However, although it seemed to be floating slowly, the speed of the three-legged round cauldron itself, it had reached an unimaginable level. Almost without any time, the three-legged round cauldron had already arrived beside the main hall master from afar. Before the main hall master could react, it had already collided with him. The main hall master suffered such a terrifying collision. There was a hint of helplessness on his face. Then, his entire body shattered like a silhouette made of glass. Countless cracks that looked like spider webs appeared on the surface of his body. Then, all the cracks continued to expand and expand. In the blink of an eye, the powerful main hall master was turned into countless tiny fragments. However, even though he was turned into fragments, he did not collapse immediately. Instead, he seemed to be frozen in midair by a terrifying force, maintaining his original figure. At first glance, he seemed to be exactly the same as before. However, this was not all. After that, the fragments continued to shatter, and each fragment shattered into tens of thousands of pieces. From the original thumb-sized fragments, they continued to shatter into powder, and finally, they shattered into dust. In the end, they completely turned into a faint mist, causing the main hall master, who was frozen in midair by a terrifying force, to seem illusory and real at the same time. It was as if he was condensed from mist. How could it be so easy? Luo Fan frowned and raised his hand. The three-legged round cauldron shook slightly, and the main hall master, who had turned into mist, collapsed and continued to shatter in the void. In the end, he completely disappeared without a trace, not even leaving a trace of mist. At this point, although Luo Fan felt that things were not so simple, under such a fact, he could only think that things were really like this. That's good too, it saves me a lot of trouble, Luo Fan thought to himself. He raised his hand and waved, and the three-legged round cauldron slowly floated towards him. This time, it was truly floating. Its speed was not as mysterious as before, which seemed slow but was actually fast. It took a long time for it to slowly arrive in front of him. This magic artifact is actually so powerful. Why don't I keep it and refine it into a pseudo-sage treasure? Stroking the three-legged round cauldron, Luo Fan thought to himself. After thinking for a while, he smiled slightly. If he had time, he might be able to do this, but he could not rely on it. After all, this three-legged round cauldron was a magic artifact created by the main hall master. Although it had been modified by him, and was slightly different from the original, it was still fundamentally the same. If it was refined into a pseudo-sage treasure, it might be extremely powerful against other cultivators, but if it encountered the main hall master, the result would be extremely tragic. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable palpitation. The expression on his face changed greatly. He directly blasted the three-legged round cauldron into the void above him. That's right, it was a ferocious bombardment. It was no longer the kind of suppression and compression that made it seem as if it was floating. Instead, it was a ferocious bombardment that did not care about anything. Even if it destroyed the entire world and the entire universe, it did not care at all. The effect of this attack was not visible, and there were no changes in the target location. However, the entire universe had already suffered extremely serious consequences because of this. With Luo Fan as the center, the star domain within hundreds of billions of light-years was completely destroyed in an instant. The entire process was like a calm pond filled with silt at the bottom turning muddy because of an earthquake. In the blink of an eye, the space-time within hundreds of billions of light-years turned into a paste. Even the laws, as well as the void, completely collapsed at this moment. They were completely destroyed and turned into a part of the gray paste. In the midst of this transformation, countless galaxies, stellar systems, planets, and living beings perished without even feeling a thing. Luo Fan was well aware of this change, but he could no longer care about it at this moment. At this moment, the palpitation in his heart was so intense that he could barely maintain his body's stability. The unprecedented crisis of life and death made him no longer care about anything in the outside world. He only knew to constantly activate the power of the three-legged round cauldron, stimulating the power of the universe, so that the three-legged round cauldron's power could reach the peak that he could control. At this moment, hundreds of kilometers above Luo Fan, where the three-legged round cauldron was facing, space-time suddenly broke. The breaking of this space-time was completely different from the space-time that was destroyed by a powerful force. The destruction of space-time by a powerful force was the complete destruction of space-time and the complete destruction of the balance between space-time and space. At this moment, the breaking of this space-time was like an excessive amount of water being stuffed into a sealed bottle, forcibly breaking the space-time. Chapter 12:10. As soon as the palm reached out, the entire universe began to shake slightly, as if it had been stuffed into a sealed bottle that was far beyond its capacity. The process of the universe's complete destruction, which had stopped due to the appearance of the three-legged round cauldron, started again and continued to sink into the abyss of destruction. Such a change was that the essence of this palm was actually higher than the entire universe, reaching a level that even the universe couldn't bear. How terrifying was that palm! The three-legged round cauldron that Luo Fan had thrown out was aimed at such a palm. This must be the real body of the Venerable One. Luo Fan instantly thought so. His expression grew more serious and his vigilance increased. He frantically plundered all the power in the universe and poured it into the three-legged round cauldron, increasing its already terrifying power. He no longer cared about the endurance of the universe, nor did he care what serious consequences it would cause if he extracted so much power from the universe. After the white and tender palm reached out, it shook slightly and grabbed at the three-legged round cauldron while the universe was shaking. The three-legged round cauldron, which had been magnified countless times and was as large as a star, was slowly reduced to the size of a palm by some incredible mechanism. It was grasped in the palm of the white and tender hand. As for the three-legged round cauldron, which originally had an aura that was enough to cause inexplicable changes in the entire universe and was about to completely collapse, it seemed as if it did not exist at all under such circumstances. It had no effect at all. The moment the three-legged round cauldron fell into the palm trembled slightly. In an instant, countless amounts of red blood suddenly gushed out of the many pores and apertures on the palm. As soon as the blood appeared, it turned into countless powerful strange creatures that exuded an aura comparable to that of a peak sage-to-be, which was comparable to that of a Tao master. They were about to disperse towards the entire universe and destroy it. However, the moment they were completely formed, a strange power burst out of their bodies, instantly disintegrating them and turning them into fine blood mist. There was nothing special about them anymore. It was just like the blood spat out by ordinary people. When Luo Fan saw this, his heart skipped a beat. This sudden change in the palm was not due to the impact of the three-legged cauldron. After all, this three-legged cauldron was condensed from the endless grayish existence in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. Naturally, he could clearly sense all the changes that occurred on it. In the instant that the palm grabbed the three-legged cauldron, the cauldron's body trembled violently. He could feel it. The three-legged cauldron's power did not have any effect at all. It was as if it didn't exist at all and turned into nothingness. It didn't feel like it had hit its opponent or hit anything at all. This feeling. Clearly, this meant that the peerless might of the three-legged cauldron hadn't poured onto the palm of the main body at all. Since that was the case, then the severe injuries that the palm had suffered were naturally not caused by him. Could it be that he still hasn't recovered from the injuries he suffered in the great battle? Could it be that it's extremely difficult for him to stretch out his palm? Luo Fan instantly had such a thought. The appearance of such a thought instantly dispelled the involuntary despair that was born in him. Since the main body's palm was so difficult to stretch out, it meant that the palm didn't have much power left to deal with him. As long as he was a little careful, it wouldn't be difficult for him to survive. Understanding this, Luo Fan raised his hand and condensed another three-legged cauldron rune. He continued the previous process by grabbing a larger grayish existence and pouring it into the rune. In the blink of an eye, a grayish three-legged cauldron was formed. If Luo Fan wanted to condense such a three-legged cauldron in another universe or another world, it would not have been so simple. He would have needed a long time to prepare, and it would have been even more impossible to attract so much of the grayish existence in such a careless manner. Instead, he would have needed to make countless preparations and grab a small amount of the grayish existence bit by bit and integrate it into the rune bit by bit. Finally, after a long time, he could condense such a three-legged cauldron like this. For example, if he wanted to do this on Earth, it would take him at least hundreds of thousands of years to complete it. However, in this universe, the situation was naturally completely different. As a powerful existence that was almost created by him, Luo Fan was almost omnipotent in this universe. He was omniscient, and there was nothing he did not know. Even though this universe seemed to be heading towards the abyss of destruction, it was still not destroyed after all. The great power of this universe still existed, and this allowed him to do everything he wanted to do without any qualms. Then, he would be able to wantonly draw the grayish existence into this universe and modify it at will. In this way, the process that would normally take hundreds of thousands of years to complete was compressed in the blink of an eye. After this three-legged cauldron was formed, the aura that suppressed and destroyed everything was even more intense than the aura that the three-legged cauldron emitted earlier. Unfortunately, at this moment, because of the existence of the palm, the process of this universe heading towards destruction was even more determined than before. Although the three-legged cauldron was suppressing it, it could not stop it from continuing towards destruction. In fact, it could not even slow it down a little. At this moment, the palm that the main body stretched out was covered in blood due to the previous abnormality. It no longer looked like a perfect representative like before. Instead, it looked like it had reached out from the abyss of hell. It was a palm that stretched out towards the light with great difficulty. In fact, the palm was even trembling slightly at this moment, like a dying patient lifting his hand with great difficulty. In the void, this palm seemed to be hesitating whether it should continue to reach out and erase Luo Fan, or if it should stop here. At this moment, the three-legged cauldron that Luo Fan had condensed was finally completely formed, and the powerful suppression aura instantly enveloped the palm. At this moment, the owner of the palm seemed to have finally made a decision. Before the three-legged cauldron could strike, it shrank slightly. It shrank back to the position that was broken by the palm. It had completely left this universe. With the departure of the palm, the feeling that the universe had been stuffed with an object that was far beyond what it could bear instantly disappeared. The entire process of the universe heading towards the abyss of destruction instantly stopped, maintaining its broken state and remaining stable. It seemed like it could exist forever like this. Seeing this, Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that his guess was indeed correct. The injuries that the Venerable One suffered in the battle that shattered his pseudo-holy artifact trillions of years ago were not enough to completely erase his life. However, they remained in his body, and were still constantly entangled with his body. Even after such a long time had passed, they did not disappear at all. And this injury was serious enough that he did not even have the confidence to resist the three-legged cauldron that would not have posed any threat to him under normal circumstances. This allowed Luo Fan to escape and avoid the fate of the main body reaching out to wipe him out. Fortunately, this is the case. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I wouldn't have been able to escape today. Luo Fan exhaled a long breath, and a happy smile appeared on his face. Perhaps, in addition to my physical injuries, the three-legged cauldron that I had condensed was also his target. That's why I was able to safely survive this wave. Roughly guessing the main body's state, Luo Fan already had an answer to his doubts about why the main body had sent such a weak projection into this universe. At the same time, he also had some confidence about his safety after entering the demon realm. Judging from the changes in the palm just now, the main body's attack had clearly worsened his injuries. At this moment, even if he could not protect himself, it would be difficult for him to spare a hand to deal with Linley. In this case, after entering the demon realm, as long as he was careful and did not court death to become the main body's dish, his safety should not be a big problem. Understanding this, the smile on Lin Li's face became even more cheerful. After a period of happiness, he looked at the situation in the universe and could not help but sigh. Almost 60% of the universe had been destroyed because of the battle with the main body. Even though it was becoming increasingly difficult for intelligent life forms to be born in this universe, 70% of them had been destroyed in the process. The entire universe had truly turned from a heavenly place to a wasteland of a battlefield. Almost every galaxy and star system had been damaged, big or small. There was almost no planet in the entire universe that was intact. Even the most intact planet had cracks that went deep into the planet's core. Such a tragic scene caused the universe to be filled with sorrow and despair. Even though Luo Fan was not someone who was overflowing with sympathy, he still felt a little uncomfortable watching these changes. It's a pity that in the destruction of the entire universe, the dead life forms have died too thoroughly. It's not just their bodies, even their souls have completely collapsed and perished. Even their life force has completely dissipated. It's impossible to recover them. Otherwise, the entire universe would have been restored to its original state. Luo Fan sighed and waved his hand in the air. In an instant, the entire universe was like a lion that had suddenly been awakened from a deep slumber. It began to tremble slightly, and all the power in the universe was mobilized. Whether it was the power of spacetime, the power of Yuan Qi, or even the power of laws and laws, everything went from a dead and still state to an extremely active state in an instant. Due to the countless changes in power, the entire universe seemed to have opened up and evolved. The originally shattered stars began to condense again, the originally shattered planets were restored, and the many damages on the various planets gradually returned to their original state as if time had been reversed. The entire process was like a miracle. It was like the evolution of all things at the beginning of the universe. Meanwhile, the originally shattered laws and laws, the void, and even the unseen world started to gradually recover as a result of these changes. This change did not just appear in one location, but in the entire universe. It was unknown how many trillions of light years it appeared in any location in the universe, whether it was near Luo Fan or at the edge of the universe that was infinitely far away from Luo Fan. They were all the same. There was no difference in the process. It was really boundless, and everyone was treated equally. This was Luo Fan's powerful power in the universe. It was a great power that could make the entire universe go over and over again. Although Luo Fan used the power of the universe itself to carry out this repair work. But as the saying went, it was easy to destroy but difficult to build. The entire universe was destroyed in just a few short moments, but when Luo Fan wanted to completely repair it, the time needed was not just a few short moments. After a full 3 days and 3 nights, only then did Luo Fan stop this repair process. At this time, the entire situation in the universe had returned to its original state before it was destroyed. Compared to before, it was even more complete, flawless, and calm. Apart from the deaths of 70% of the population, and the unknown number of Jing, Gai, and even Ho people, everything seemed to be exactly the same as before the Venerable One appeared. Among them, trillions were Zhao, 10,000 Zhao were Jing, 10,000 Jing were Ho, and 10,000 Ho were Ho. The emotions of all living beings in the universe were really fluctuating in the past few days. They were living a peaceful life when suddenly the world turned upside down. All kinds of terrifying waves swept across, and all kinds of powerful auras oppressed them to the point that their minds almost went blank. Suddenly, the entire universe fell into destruction. Who knew how many of their companions, relatives, and friends suddenly died along with the destruction of planets, stars, and galaxies? Then, after a while, everything calmed down. The world began to reconstruct itself, and everything that was previously destroyed began to recover. Such a change was completely beyond what they could bear. For a moment, they simply could not grasp how they should face this seemingly familiar but actually completely unfamiliar universe. This change changed the mentality of countless people, and changed the originally incomparably stubborn thoughts of countless people. And this change had an extremely profound impact on the entire universe, causing the situation of the entire universe to unknowingly undergo all kinds of indescribable changes. The atmosphere of cultivation became more and more intense as a result. This was obviously for sure. In the past, existences who disdained cultivation could not maintain their original mentality after experiencing the upheaval of the world. How could they not know the importance of cultivation? Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about this. After he did his best to completely restore the destruction that the universe had suffered, he took a deep breath and completely eliminated the physical and mental exhaustion caused by controlling the power of the entire universe in the past 3 days. Although he did not use his own power to complete the transformation of the entire universe in the past 3 days and 3 nights, he did not use his own power to replenish the universe. After all, he was controlling the mighty power of the entire universe, and after all, he had made such a meticulous control. Although it did not consume much of his power, it was extremely taxing on his mental strength. This caused him to feel extremely exhausted after experiencing these 3 days and 3 nights. Fortunately, he had completely integrated his cultivation achievements with everything that he was, and he had also completely integrated everything that he was. Otherwise, not only would he not be able to control the universe, but even if he could control it, he would need tens of thousands of years of cultivation to recover from the exhaustion of these 3 days and 3 nights. How could he be like now, where he only needed to take a deep breath to completely recover from his physical and mental exhaustion? In the future, I will not be a burden to you anymore. At this moment, such a voice appeared in Luo Fan's mind. This voice was a cold woman's voice, which contained a temperament that calmed one's heart. It was a voice that Luo Fan was extremely familiar with, the voice of the Space Maiden. The Space Maiden was not cultivating in seclusion. Although she was in the Creation Shrine, and the Creation Shrine was in Luo Fan's world in the sleeve, because Luo Fan had encountered a powerful enemy, he did not have the energy to seal the world in the sleeve at all. Therefore, she had seen the battle between Luo Fan and the main holiness very clearly. She no longer had any doubts as to why Luo Fan was in such a hurry to shove her into the Creation Shrine to sort out his worldview. After understanding the truth, the Space Maiden felt an indescribable discomfort in her heart. After she and Luo Fan became cultivation partners, although Luo Fan had encountered many enemies and fought many battles, those battles were almost all absolutely one-sided battles. This kind of battle could not make her feel too much about her own weakness. After all, the opponent was so weak, no matter how strong she would not be of any help, and no matter how weak she would not be a burden. But this time, the strength of the Venerable One that Luo Fan had encountered had already reached a desperate situation. Luo Fan had spent a lot of effort to escape. This made her finally feel how weak she was, and she understood how much of a burden she was by following Luo Fan. Chapter 12:11. Luo Fan smiled when he heard the words in his heart. How are you a burden? I was the one who caused this in the first place. If you really want to blame someone, I should be the one who dragged you down. However, he did not receive a reply from the air hostess. Evidently, the air hostess did not think that Luo Fan's reply could be considered a real answer. She did not think that there was a need for such a reply. Luo Fan did not have anything else to say after hearing that. He sighed. He knew what the air hostess was thinking, but he did not dwell on it. Although he did not think that the air hostess was a burden, it was a good thing that the air hostess had such thoughts. He could not, and did not need to, dispel such thoughts. After letting this matter go, Luo Fan raised his head and looked at the gigantic door. At this moment, the door stood in the void of the universe. Its gigantic appearance and the shocking aura showed that it was different from the others. The huge door that stood in the void of the universe was extremely eye-catching at this moment. Now that the entire universe had just undergone a drastic change, not many life forms would pay attention to the changes that had occurred in the universe. However, if the massive gate remained here for a longer period of time, those life forms would definitely gradually notice the existence of the massive gate. At that time, This place might once again become the center of the entire universe. However, all of this was built on the foundation that Luo Fan would leave such a huge space-time door in this location. After all, the foundation of the door was no longer a vortex formed from a fragment of a pseudo-saint treasure like when it first appeared. Instead, it was Luo Fan's will. The fragment had already become a part of the creation god boy and became his main body's food. The vortex had also completely disappeared. The reason why the door still existed in this state was because Luo Fan wanted the door to exist. It was because Luo Fan wanted to enter the demon world through the door, so the door still existed at this moment. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan did not even need to disperse the door after he left. He only needed to remove the will that maintained the door's existence. The door would collapse with a loud rumble. It turned into nothingness in an instant. It was impossible for it to remain for a long time like it did in the past. Luo Fan stood in front of this huge door. In front of him was the one that was extremely small compared to the door. But to him, it was a huge gap. The crack in the door was filled with an aura of the demon realm that was beyond common sense. Why was the aura of the demon realm so thick? Luo Fan couldn't make sense of it at all. He didn't know what caused the aura to be so dense. However, after the exchange and battle with the Exalted One, he came to a complete understanding. The reason why these auras were so dense was because of the Earth Core formation. The main reason was that the portal led to the demon realm, which was the place where the venerated god and another powerful pseudo-holiness had battled. It was precisely because it was the battlefield that a large amount of power gathered there. Naturally, it brought with it an extremely dense aura that far exceeded the aura of the demon realm in other regions of the demon realm. The aura of the demon realm from the battlefield spread through the huge door in front of him, which was why it was so astonishingly dense and displayed the various unbelievable scenes back then. Previously, Luo Fan thought that the aftermath of the battle should have dissipated a lot after countless trillions of years. Even if there was some destructive power, it should not be too great. As long as he was slightly prepared, it should not be difficult for him to completely withstand it. However, after witnessing the changes that the hand that he suspected to be from the Exalted One's main body had gone through, he instantly threw this thought out of his mind. The power in the Exalted One's body was constantly being worn down by him, constantly resisting the Exalted One's refinement and expulsion. Even after countless trillions of years, it still possessed such terrifying power that the Exalted One could not even use his power. The aftermath of the battle on the battlefield was just a natural evolution. Could it be worse than the Exalted One's body? Dissipated even more. It seems that I need to prepare the strongest defense first so that I won't be instantly erased after stepping into the battlefield. Luo Fan thought to himself. He thought for a while, and focused his gaze on the three-legged cauldron in front of him. Judging from the previous performance of the Venerable One, this three-legged round cauldron was now extremely insignificant to him. He picked up the same three-legged round cauldron with one hand, so this conclusion could be drawn. However, if the level of the cauldron was further improved and refined into a magic weapon, then into a pseudo-saint treasure, or even to the peak of the pseudo-saint treasure, the situation would be different. That battlefield was caused by the battle between the Exalted One and another powerful pseudo-holy treasure. In the previous battle, the pseudo-holy treasure was only shattered, and the aftermath of the battle was obviously withstood by the pseudo-holy treasure. In this way, even if Luo Fan couldn't refine this three-legged cauldron to the same level as the one in the main venerate's hands, it shouldn't be a problem for him to protect himself in the aftermath of the battle. With this thought in mind, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. He had already made a decision. He floated in the void of this universe, and with a wave of his hand countless lines appeared out of thin air in an instant, instantly outlining a repeatedly mysterious space-time formation in front of him. As soon as this space-time formation appeared, it instantly enveloped the three-legged cauldron, and then accelerated the flow of time around the three-legged cauldron to more than 10,000 times the normal speed. Then, countless lines appeared out of thin air, enveloping the original space-time formation, and also began to accelerate the flow of time around the space-time formation to more than 10,000 times the normal speed. Following that, another space-time formation enveloped the second space-time formation. In this way, layers of space-time formations were layered on top of each other, and each space-time formation distorted the flow of time within it to more than 10,000 times the normal speed of the outside world. Moreover, the flow of time was also stacked layer by layer. When there were two layers of space-time formations, the flow of time in the innermost layer increased to 10,000 times the normal speed. In other words, it was 100 million times the normal speed of the outside world. When the number of space-time formations reached 3 layers, the flow of time in the innermost layer increased by 10,000 times, which was 1 trillion times. It continued to increase in this manner. When Luo Fan finally came to a complete stop, there were already hundreds of layers of the space-time array. At this moment, in the innermost layer of space-time formations, the difference between the flow of time and the flow of time in the outside world had almost exceeded the limit of numbers. Almost every moment in the outside world was equivalent to trillions of years in the innermost layer of space-time formations. Such a terrifying difference was many times more terrifying than the space-time formations that Luo Fan had set up for the divine creation boy. And to do this, although Luo Fan still wanted to set up a few more layers of space-time formations, he found that he could no longer do it. It was not because this was the limit that the space-time formations could be superimposed, but because this was the limit that the entire universe and him could bear. The reason why Luo Fan could now build these space-time formations in a wilder manner than the one that he had set up for the divine creation boy and speed up the distortion of time by the space-time formations was because he was now almost omnipotent in this universe. In other words, he was actually using the power of this universe to set up these space-time formations. Under such circumstances, when the construction of each space-time formation was completed, it was equivalent to adding an invisible burden to this universe. And obviously everything, even the universe, even the chaotic state could not bear everything without limit. The more the space-time formations were superimposed, the heavier the invisible burden on the universe would be. Now, after the layers of the space-time formations had been superimposed to hundreds of layers, this invisible burden had finally reached the limit that the entire universe could bear. Even if he forcibly supported the universe to bear this burden, he could not make this space-time formation superimpose even a small layer. Because the invisible burden had reached its limit, the entire universe was in a very strange state at this moment. The entire universe was making cracking sounds all the time, like a piece of wood that was bearing a weight that was approaching its limit, and its interior was gradually disintegrating and breaking. Any living creature in this universe found that the world in their eyes had become extremely strange. Time seemed to be in chaos, and space had also become extremely mysterious. They could suddenly see things that happened countless years ago, and suddenly see things that happened countless years later in the future. Sometimes they could even see scenes that were countless light years away from where they were. It was really like an extremely absurd and strange dream. At this moment, Luo Fan was helping the universe bear the invisible burden, and he carefully sensed what was happening in the center of the hundreds of layers of space-time formations. The powerful invisible burden made him feel like he could not move at all. It was as if he made the slightest mistake, his entire body would collapse in an instant, and even his life source would be completely erased in an instant. He had only felt this instant of life and death when he faced off against the main body of the main body, but it was an extremely indescribable feeling to him. At this moment, he actually only needed to reduce the space-time formation by 100 layers, and he would be able to completely eliminate this feeling. In that case, the distorted time inside the space-time formation was still extremely terrifying, and it could still be equivalent to a huge number of years in every instant. However, Luo Fan did not have such thoughts at all. It was definitely not an ordinary thing for a magic weapon to become a pseudo-sage treasure, especially when Luo Fan was not in the mood to refine it at this moment. The difficulty was even more terrifying. Even Luo Fan did not know how long it would take for the three-legged cauldron to grow from a magic weapon to the limit of its growth. Would it be the Ganges Sand Year, the Asangi Year, the Unthinkable Year, or even the Immeasurable Year? Go 10, 100,000, 10,000, 100,000,000, Zhao Jing, Gai Li Rang, Go Jian, Zheng, Zai Ji Ganges, Sha Aseng, Yu Him, inconceivable, immeasurable. These are the units of measurement. If it took too long, he would have waited outside for several years. It might even take a few months, or even shorter, a few days for this three-legged cauldron to grow to its peak, which was equivalent to a pseudo-saint level 9 treasure. If that was the case, wouldn't he have to wait until the end of time and the universe was destroyed if he reduced the nesting by 100 more layers? With hundreds of layers of nesting, the distorted flow of time had reached the level of hundreds of millions of years in every instant. It was because of this consideration that Luo Fan wanted to push the nesting of the space-time formation to his limit. If he still could not wait for the magic weapon to grow to its peak after reaching his limit, he could only wait for it to grow as much as it could. If he reduced the nesting of the space-time formation in order to relax, he would not be able to wait for the magic weapon to grow to its peak. Then it would be too late for regret. Luo Fan sat cross-legged in the void. He quietly observed the three-legged cauldron in the layers of space-time formation, watching the three-legged cauldron temper itself and improve its essence with great difficulty. After more than 2 hours had passed in the outside world, the three-legged cauldron naturally broke through its limit. It transformed from the original magic weapon level to a magic weapon. It gave birth to a rune that was so intelligent that it completely understood itself as soon as it appeared. It even began to create a cultivation method according to the rune to speed up the speed of its tempering. It seemed very fast, but don't forget, although only 2 hours had passed in the outside world. However, at the very center of the layers of space-time formations, countless eons had already passed. It took such a long time to transform from a magic weapon to a magic weapon. Although it was because no one took the initiative to temper it, and it only relied on its own power to temper itself, it was enough to see how difficult it was for this three-legged cauldron to grow. It's actually so difficult. Fortunately, I reached the limit before. Otherwise, how many years would I have to wait to see it become a magic weapon? When Luo Fan thought of the long time that almost made him think of the end of the universe, he could not help but secretly rejoice. After it gave birth to a treasure spirit and became a magic weapon, the self-tempering speed of the magic weapon was tens of thousands of times faster than before. However, compared to the transformation of a magic weapon, the difficulty of a magic weapon's transformation was also tens of thousands of times higher. In this way, the three-legged cauldron's level did not seem to be much faster than before. Another unknown number of years passed in the formation, and another 2 hours passed in the outside world. By then, the three-legged cauldron had broken through to become a treasure of the immortal Tao, reaching the level of primordial pure yang, and its power was over 10,000 times stronger than before. After reaching this level, the difficulty of the magic weapon's transformation increased again. This time, it took more than 4 hours to break through from the primordial pure yang level to the great perfection level. After reaching the great perfection level, it was even more difficult to upgrade the magic weapon. After waiting for a day and a night, it finally broke through the great perfection level and entered the entry stage of Sage to be. Another 3 days passed, and it entered the minor perfection level. Another 9 days passed, and it entered the intermediate perfection level. 1 month passed, and it entered the great perfection level of Sage to be. Just like that, because of the increasing difficulty, it continued to increase. Only after 10,000 years did this treasure finally reach the peak of what it could reach. During these 10,000 years, the magic weapon had been quietly tempering itself in the space-time formation. The space-time around the space-time formation seemed to have been distorted into a black hole. It was so dark that even Luo Fan's figure was completely obscured. For such a long period of time, because the universe was always in a state of extreme burden, all living beings were in an extremely strange dreamlike state. No matter how strong a cultivator was, they couldn't escape from that state at all. They couldn't find the source of this state at all. Because of this strange dreamlike state, none of the countless living beings in the universe knew that 10,000 years had passed, even though 10,000 years had passed steadily. In the minds of all living beings, they had completely lost the concept of the passage of time. Even the change of space had completely lost its meaning for them. Under such circumstances, except for the area where Luo Fan was located, which was suppressed by Luo Fan's existence, almost all other places in the universe were mixed together. How could the intelligence of those living beings be able to distinguish such chaos? Of course, this strange state of mixing all living beings together in a daze was not without any benefit. Because time, space, and universal laws had become chaotic, those living beings who did not have a lifespan of 10,000 years did not feel the loss of their lifespan at all. Even the wanderers who were born and died at dusk had lived for 10,000 years. None of the living beings died because of the exhaustion of their lifespan. This was also a kind of unexpected gain. At this moment, Luo Fan was bearing that invisible burden for 10,000 years. Naturally, the feeling was so uncomfortable that even he could not bear it. Chapter 12:12. On this day, 10,000 years after the space-time formation was set up, the hundreds of layers of space-time formation trembled slightly. Then, the changes that caused the space-time formation to distort and form a black hole that completely isolated all prying eyes from the outside world gradually weakened. At the same time, the entire universe, which was on the verge of collapsing but had yet to collapse, was also gradually fading. Of course, the speed of the fading was relatively slow. It was as if several layers of space-time formations had collapsed before there was a slight change that could be sensed by ordinary living beings. This process continued for a long time. When all the space-time formations completely collapsed, all the abnormalities in the entire universe completely disappeared. The strange situation where time and space were extremely chaotic and the entire universe was completely mixed apart from the central region disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never appeared in the first place. When all the changes disappeared, all the living beings in the universe woke up as if they had just woken up from a dream. However, everything that had happened in the past 10,000 years seemed to be separated by a layer. It was like ordinary people who had a ridiculous dream and could only vaguely sense what kind of dream it was after waking up. Similarly, they could only know some short fragments and could not understand the true situation at all. Luo Fan naturally did not care about this at all. At this moment, all his attention was focused on the thing that appeared in front of him after the layers of the space-time formation collapsed. It was a three-legged round cauldron. One of them looked extremely ordinary, extremely ordinary. There was even a bronze, three-legged round cauldron on top of it. The three-legged, round cauldron floated in the void and did not seem to be abnormal at all. It was simply like a work of art that was cast by mortals. Looking at the three-legged, round cauldron, Luo Fan only had a faint look of joy on his face. "Boy, what are you waiting for? Show yourself!" He shouted softly and raised his hand to point at the three-legged, round cauldron. In an instant the three-legged, round cauldron trembled slightly. A powerful aura instantly burst out from its body and swept across the entire universe, causing the consciousness of all the living beings in the universe to be suppressed in an instant. They completely lost all sense of the outside world. They even lost all sense of time. They all turned into existences that seemed to be made of flesh and bones. At first, only living beings experienced this change. However, as the aura became stronger, more and more factors were affected. From a living being, gradually, it extended to everything in the universe. It was not just about all kinds of things. It even included the laws and laws of this universe, including all the laws and laws within. This aura completely suppressed everything in this universe. In that instant, it was as if time had completely stopped in this universe. Everything seemed to have frozen. Be it the falling leaves on the surface of the planet, the fixed stars orbiting the fixed stars in the universe, the fixed stars orbiting the center of the galaxy, or even the galaxy orbiting the center of a certain star field, everything came to a complete stop in an instant. It looked as if the universe was a three-dimensional picture, a lifeless and extremely strange three-dimensional picture. As the aura surged, the three-legged cauldron began to slowly shrink and expand, like a huge heart that was slowly beating. Sensing such an aura, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel happier than before. Such an aura was many times stronger than his own at this moment. Although it couldn't compare to the pressure that the main holiness gave him, it wasn't too far off. They were definitely existences of the same level. This strong feeling made him very clear that the three-legged cauldron in front of him had indeed reached the level of a pseudo-sage level 9. Its power was so strong that it could instantly destroy thousands of universes that he was in. In fact, if it were to erupt, even Luo Fan wouldn't be able to completely withstand it. Even if he was almost omnipotent in this universe and could even reach the level of a sage, he couldn't change this fact. Thankfully, I was the one who forged this magic treasure, so its foundation is in my hands. Knowing that this magic treasure was much stronger than him, Luo Fan didn't panic. Instead, he felt an indescribable sense of joy. No matter how strong this magic treasure was, it was still a magic treasure. On the other hand, when he was refining this cauldron all those years ago, he'd already inscribed his own brand on its foundation. Under such circumstances, no matter how strong this magic treasure was, it was still a magic treasure that belonged to him. Even if this magic treasure could completely mince him with just a slight movement, it wouldn't change this fact. As such, the stronger this magic treasure was, the more benefits it would bring him. There was no need for him to worry, so he was naturally filled with joy. Every time the three-legged cauldron shrank and expanded, the entire universe felt like it was shrinking and expanding. It was as if the universe couldn't withstand the changes that were happening to it. After this shrinkage and expansion continued for 12,960 times, it suddenly stopped. Following this, the three-legged cauldron's figure slowly turned illusory. A boy that looked like he was 6 or 7 years old gradually became real. In the end, when the three-legged cauldron completely disappeared and the boy's figure became real, the aura that suppressed the entire universe and made it seem like time had stopped completely disappeared. The entire universe returned to its normal state, looking no different from before. All the living beings in the universe couldn't feel the time they had been suppressed by the aura. They couldn't even feel that part of their memories had disappeared. To them, it felt like they had only blinked, and everything in the universe was no different from before. When Luo Fan saw the boy that appeared in front of him, his expression froze slightly, and he frowned. There was no other reason. Although the boy was 6 or 7 years old, he could clearly see that he was a boy. It was the appearance of the main sovereign when he was young. That kind of flawless makeup, that kind of absolutely perfect temperament, that kind of feeling that would make anyone who saw it feel like holding it in their arms and loving it dearly. Everything was the same feeling that Luo Fan had seen in the past, the feeling that was stolen from the projection of the Venerable One. I didn't expect that even after I changed the rune so much, it's still on the main body. The mark he left behind is still so deep. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. At this time, the boy came forward and bowed to Luo Fan. He said, "Tianding boy greets master." "Heaven Cauldron? This is the name you gave yourself, right?" Luo Fan sorted out his emotions. he asked after indicating that it didn't need to be so polite. Master, that's not the case. Heaven Cauldron is a name that naturally appeared in my heart when I was born. Its full name is Heavenly Cauldron of the Divine Court, Heavenly Cauldron Boy said. Luo Fan listened. He furrowed his brows again. In such a situation, it was obvious that the mark left by the main sovereign in the rune was too deep. The Heavenly Cauldron of the Divine Court must be the real name of the three-legged cauldron. As expected. It's right that I don't take this magic treasure as my own. Luo Fan sighed and didn't say anything else. He quietly comprehended the various magical uses of the Heavenly Cauldron of the Divine Court. The current level of the Heavenly Cauldron of the Divine Court was too high. At least, for Luo Fan at this moment, its realm was already too high to reach. As soon as he entered the state of comprehension, he felt as if a boundless universe had appeared in front of him. This universe was filled with endless mysteries and profundities. He was only equivalent to a tiny planet in this universe. No matter how he extended his senses, he couldn't reach the end of the universe. He didn't even know if there was an end to the universe. In such a state, it was obvious that even if he exhausted all his strength and wisdom, he would not be able to perfectly display the miraculous power of the Heavenly Cauldron of the Divine Court. Even if he used it against an enemy, it would be this Heavenly Cauldron Boy who would attack in the end, not him. As a treasure spirit of a magic treasure, due to its natural limitations, the Heavenly Cauldron Boy could only exert 1%, or even 1,000th, or even 1/10,000th of its power. With such power, it was impossible to use it against a pseudo-sage level 9 existence. Moreover, if Luo Fan used it when facing a level 9 sage, the level 9 sage could instantly seize the magic treasure and erase all the imprints that Luo Fan left in the Heavenly Cauldron and brand it with his own imprint. This was the result of the gap between realms. Even if Luo Fan's strength was far beyond his realm, he couldn't think of any way to go against such a huge gap between realms. After comprehending for a while, Luo Fan gave up on continuing to comprehend. Although this magic treasure was profound, it wasn't the Tao that he practiced. Comprehending it would only increase his knowledge, and it would only give him some side enlightenment for his cultivation. Under such circumstances, if he could easily comprehend the mysteries of this magic treasure, then comprehending it would naturally be of great benefit. However, it would take a long time to comprehend the mysteries of this magic treasure, and it might even delay his cultivation. In the end, it was almost impossible for him to completely comprehend the mysteries of this magic treasure, which was not worth the loss. The current situation was very clear. The level of this magic treasure was far beyond the limits of what Luo Fan could understand. Even if he comprehended it for hundreds of millions of years, unless he raised his realm to the corresponding level, it would be impossible for him to comprehend all the mysteries of this magic treasure, and it would be impossible for him to fully grasp all its power. Under such circumstances, he naturally couldn't waste time here. Although Luo Fan was unable to fully comprehend all the wonderful uses of this magic treasure, he was the one who refined it after all. Just now, he had comprehended all the uses of this magic treasure, but he also understood all the uses of this magic treasure. He raised his hand and pointed at the Heavenly Cauldron Boy. With a shake, the Heavenly Cauldron Boy turned into a three-legged cauldron that was as tall as a person. With a slight shake, it pulled Luo Fan into the round cauldron from the mouth of the cauldron. After entering the round cauldron, Luo Fan felt that he had entered a gray, boundless void. In this place, the powerful suppression intent was unimaginably dense. It could even be said that this gray, hazy place was the embodiment of the normal world being suppressed to the point that it could not take shape at all due to the suppression intent being too strong. With a gentle wave of his hand, the surrounding light and shadow changed. The gray, hazy place completely dissipated, and in its place was a boundless void of the universe. There was also an incomparably huge door that stood in the void of the universe. This was the scene outside the round cauldron. Of course, all of this was not the scene that Luo Fan had opened up in the gray, hazy place by withstanding the extremely powerful suppression force of the Heavenly Divine Court Cauldron. If he had complete control of the Heavenly Divine Court Cauldron, he would naturally be able to do this. However, at this moment, he was still unimaginably far from that realm, so how could he do this? This scene was actually just a smokescreen. Of course, in essence, it was a smokescreen, but it was worlds apart from ordinary smokescreen. If an ordinary person came here, it would even be like coming to the real world, experiencing everything, feeling everything, and enjoying everything. There would not be any difference from the real world, including the various resources that maintained their lives. There would not be any difference to them. Luo Fan looked at the surrounding scene and sighed inwardly. Then, he controlled the Heavenly Divine Court Cauldron to collide with the huge door. The huge door had already been pushed open by a huge gap by Luo Fan, and it had not been closed for more than 100,000 years. At this moment, there was naturally no need for Luo Fan to open the door. The three-legged round cauldron directly rushed through the door and disappeared from this universe. The moment the heavenly cauldron of the Divine Court disappeared, the entire universe shook slightly. It was like a burly man who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time was not used to the disappearance of the heavy burden. It shook for a while before gradually calming down. As it calmed down, all the living beings in the entire universe naturally felt relaxed, as if the shadow that shrouded their hearts had suddenly disappeared. It's finally over. Such an unreasonable sigh appeared in the hearts of almost all the living beings, causing them to secretly laugh at their own sentimentality afterwards. Luo Fan naturally did not know that his departure would bring such changes to the entire universe. At this moment, he had already entered an incomparably mysterious and strange place. Around him, all kinds of strange colors dyed the area, outlining an inexplicable place. This place was not heaven and earth, nor was it a universe, nor was it a world like a vast thousand world or a medium thousand world. It was not even a space. In this place, the time in the outside world seemed to have stopped, while the time in his body flowed forward at a normal speed. On the other hand, the space was twisted and spiraled. In some places the space was extended thousands of times, while in other places the space was compressed thousands of times. The aura of the demon world, which was even denser than the aura of the original world, filled the surroundings, affecting the surrounding time and space, adding to the strangeness of this space. When he looked back, the huge door had already disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. If he did not have an extremely clear sense of that universe, he might have thought that he had already lost himself in the passage, completely unable to tell whether he was moving in the right direction. The demon world is indeed completely different from ordinary worlds and dojos of ordinary sages. Although it's troublesome to enter the dojos of other sages, it's not as strange as entering the demon world. Luo Fan thought to himself. He raised his vigilance to the highest, ready to activate the power of the Heavenly Divine Court Cauldron at any time to deal with any possible changes. The time in the outside world had completely stopped, so no matter how much time passed by Luo Fan, it was meaningless to the outside world. In other words, to Luo Fan, whether the Heavenly Divine Court Cauldron was moving forward or not, he could not see the changes in the outside world at all. He could only infer whether he was moving forward or staying in the same place through the changes in the strength of his sense of the universe. In his senses, after almost tens of thousands of years had passed, the outline of a strange object suddenly appeared out of thin air in the various colors around him. Although the time in the surroundings had completely stopped, because he was in a space-time passage, it was not unchanging at all. Instead, there were countless intense changes evolving. Although the outline of this strange object had never appeared before, it was only a change in this passage. Naturally, Luo Fan did not pay too much attention to it. After glancing at the outline of the object, he put it aside and no longer cared about it. At this moment, the outline of the strange object suddenly materialized, turning into a huge round hammer, and fiercely smashed towards the heavenly divine court cauldron. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but be shocked. This was a space-time passage from another universe to the demon realm formed by the connection between the fragments of the heavenly divine court cauldron? How could such a thing happen here? How could there be such a thing as a round hammer attacking him in the passage? In the face of such an attack, there was no need for Luo Fan to control it. The heavenly divine court cauldron's self-protection instincts were naturally activated. With a slight tremble, a layer of gray light flashed across its body, wrapping around its body, and fiercely collided with the round hammer. In an instant, the entire passage shook violently, and a sense of impending destruction spread in all directions. In a trance, it seemed that in the next moment, it would completely collapse, and everything in this passage, including the round hammer, the heavenly divine court cauldron, and Luo Fan in the heavenly divine court cauldron would all be thrown out. Chapter 12-13. The round hammer was about the same size as the divine court heavenly cauldron. Compared to the huge space-time passage, it was insignificant. However, the terrifying momentum produced by the collision of the two was earth-shattering. One could even vaguely see the huge passage distorting slightly, and even the feeling of time being completely suspended changed a little, as if time had begun to flow slightly. The result of the collision was that the divine court heavenly cauldron completely shattered the round hammer, causing it to disappear completely as if it had never appeared. After the round hammer disappeared, the mysterious space-time passage shook slightly for a while before calming down. Of course, the long period of time here was naturally a long period of time in Luo Fan's own perception. For the outside world where the flow of time was completely suspended, there was no concept of a long period of time. The moment the two collided, Luo Fan's mind was strongly impacted and he felt extremely shocked. However, his body did not feel any vibration at all under the protection of the divine court heavenly cauldron. It was as if he was watching a very realistic virtual image. It's indeed a pseudo-sage level 9 magic treasure, but it's not a real thing. It's just a phantom. Luo Fan thought to himself as he instantly made a judgment about the nature of the round hammer after watching the entire collision. Just as he had this thought, an extremely familiar outline of a material appeared out of thin air outside the passage. Next, it quickly evolved into something that Luo Fan was extremely familiar with. It was a three-legged round cauldron that seemed to be made of bronze. The style of this three-legged round cauldron was different from the divine court heavenly cauldron that Luo Fan had refined. However, the aura it emitted was even more powerful than when the divine court heavenly cauldron was fully unleashed. It even vaguely suppressed the extremely rich aura that belonged to the demon realm that existed in the passage, filling the passage with an aura that belonged to the divine court heavenly cauldron that suppressed everything. After the three-legged round cauldron took shape, it slowly collided with the divine court heavenly cauldron that Luo Fan had refined. This collision instantly caused an earth-shattering effect. Two magic treasures of different styles, but essentially the same nature, collided. Compared to the round hammer and the divine court heavenly cauldron from before, the momentum that erupted was much stronger. The collision was even more terrifying. It was even more shocking. At this moment, the entire passageway did not collapse. It was a complete breakdown. Boundless colors flew in all directions, and the entire passageway no longer looked like a passageway. A broken world of colors. In the broken parts of this world, he could see an indescribable void. A void layer that was purer than any universe. An even deeper nothingness. This layer of nothingness felt as if even the unseen world hidden beneath the layer of nothingness no longer existed. In other words, such nothingness was a place that had escaped the control of the great Tao. However, such a scene only appeared for a moment. In an instant, the three-legged round cauldron that was charging towards the heavenly cauldron of the divine court that Luo Fan had refined was reduced to nothingness. The scene of the broken world that had even revealed an even deeper nothingness completely disappeared. The strange space-time tunnel took shape once again, and it even vaguely gave off a feeling that it was even more stable and wider than before. The three-legged round cauldron was the shadow of a pseudo-saint level 9 magic treasure. With these two encounters, Luo Fan already vaguely knew what kind of existence these two magic treasure phantoms that were rushing towards him were. Could it be that the shadows of these two magic treasures were formed from the traces left behind by the Venerable One when he fought with someone? Luo Fan thought to himself. Thinking of this, he wanted to urge the heavenly cauldron of the divine court to speed up, but he found that his power was like an ant trying to shake a tree against the heavenly cauldron. There was no difference at all between him and the heavenly cauldron. This feeling made Luo Fan smile awkwardly and stop this unnecessary preparation. In fact, Luo Fan was strong enough to move forward in this passageway by himself. Moreover, his speed was not very slow. Of course, that was only in terms of absolute speed. Compared to the speed of the divine court heavenly cauldron, his speed was nothing. It could be said that the speed of the divine court heavenly cauldron was like the speed of light to an ordinary person to Luo Fan. An ordinary person might be able to run very fast, so fast that people would suspect that he could fly, but how could he increase the speed of an object that was moving at the speed of light? Of course, the difference between Luo Fan and the divine court heavenly cauldron was not as huge as the difference between the speed of light and the speed of an ordinary person. However, it was barely at a level where it could be compared to this. After what felt like a few years to Luo Fan, the space-time passageway condensed more and more shadows of all kinds of pseudo-sage level 9 magic treasures that kept colliding with the divine court heavenly cauldron. At first, a magic treasure shadow would collide with it after a long time, and the power of the shadow was not too strong. However, later on, the shadows of two magic treasures appeared at the same time. Moreover, it was not only one of each magic treasure that appeared, but multiple of each magic treasure appeared. In the end, the direction in which the divine court heavenly cauldron was moving was filled with the shadows of three-legged cauldrons and round hammers. After these shadows appeared, they collided with the divine court heavenly cauldron that Luo Fan had refined without any regard for their own safety. They wanted to completely shatter Luo Fan's divine court heavenly cauldron and erase everything inside it. However, fortunately, Luo Fan's divine court heavenly cauldron was a physical existence. It was a genuine pseudo-sage level 9 magic treasure. Although the number of these magic treasure shadows was beyond imagination, and although the combined power of these magic treasures was beyond imagination, the final result of their collision was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. They did not cause any damage to the divine court heavenly cauldron at all. In fact, not a single wave was transmitted to the inside of the divine court heavenly cauldron, which was sensed by Luo Fan. On the contrary, because of the power that the divine court heavenly cauldron revealed when it collided with them, Luo Fan had a deeper understanding of the various magical uses of the divine court heavenly cauldron. Under his refinement, the power that the divine court heavenly cauldron could unleash was several times stronger than it was at the beginning. Such a change was actually a good thing for Luo Fan. Of course, it was good news for Luo Fan, but he did not feel any joy because of this. This was because every time the divine court heavenly cauldron collided with the magic treasure shadows, he felt a sense of fear. Of course, he was not afraid that the divine court heavenly cauldron could not withstand this kind of collision. From the fact that no vibration was transmitted to his body after each collision, he knew that this worry was absolutely ridiculous. What he was worried about was that the space-time passage would not be able to withstand the aftermath of the collision between the two. There was no other reason. At the beginning, when the divine court heavenly cauldron and the three-legged round cauldron collided, the terrifying waves produced caused the entire space-time passage to completely collapse. It was turned into a broken world of colors. When more magic treasure shadows collided with the divine court heavenly cauldron at the same time, the impact produced was huge, and the consequences were terrifying. One could imagine. In the end, Luo Fan could not even see the existence of the space-time passage. He could only see the broken world of colors and the almost endless magic treasure shadows continuously colliding with the divine court heavenly cauldron, trying to completely destroy it. However, this worry. Of course, in the end, it did not develop to the worst outcome. Although he was worried, he did not really despair. At least, the magic treasure shadows continued to appear, and his perception of the universe continued to weaken, becoming more and more distant. This meant that he was still advancing towards the demon realm through the space-time passage. At a certain moment, the overwhelming magic treasure shadows completely obscured everything that Luo Fan could see. Even the broken world of colors outside was completely obscured, so Luo Fan could not see through the scene simulated by the divine court heavenly cauldron at all. When Luo Fan saw this, he knew that he had probably reached the end of the passage. After this, either the passage would not be able to withstand the impact and would completely collapse, unable to recover, or he would directly break through the space-time passage and truly step into the demon realm. This realization made Luo Fan feel a flash of nervousness in his heart. He narrowed his eyes and carefully observed every detail that was happening in the outside world. The divine court's heavenly cauldron wouldn't suffer any real damage no matter how many magic treasure phantoms collided with it, and there was no essential difference in their levels. As for whether it would shock Luo Fan, who was inside the divine court heavenly cauldron, that was another matter. This time, Luo Fan finally felt the true power of the magic treasure shadows. That incomparably strong vibration was transmitted from the main body of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court to his body. At this moment, Luo Fan even felt as if his entire body had been instantly divided into billions of tiny parts. Even every bit of perception, every bit of will, every bit of his own imprint was about to be completely destroyed, completely destroyed. At this moment, he was in existence at the exceptional realm of Tao Master, and he had integrated all of himself into one. Whether it was his own cultivation, divine soul, body, Dharma power, Tao fruit, or everything else, he was a powerful existence that had integrated into one. Even he had such a feeling. It was conceivable that the impact of the divine court heavenly cauldron was so terrible. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan could only gather all of himself and forcibly maintain the integrity of himself in such a shock. In this way, he could not pay attention to the changes in the outside world. When he came back to his senses, when the tremors gradually subsided, he realized that the world around him had completely changed. It was no longer the broken world of colors, nor was it the colorful and strange space-time passageway. Instead, it was an extremely strange place. The reason why he called it this way was that even he could not accurately describe where he was at this moment. Around the divine court heavenly cauldron, everything, such as time, space, matter, energy, rule, dharma, and so on, were all in chaos. This kind of chaos was not the kind of chaos that was similar to the state of chaos. Instead, it was a kind of chaos where many terrifying powers were colliding and restoring balance at every moment. It was a kind of chaos that completely shattered everything into a state of chaos. A kind of chaos like the Great Apocalypse. In such a scene of the Great Apocalypse, strands of aura that Luo Fan was very familiar with were mixed in this chaos. At first glance, these auras felt very small. They were so weak that they could be ignored. But as long as he carefully sensed them, he would find that these auras were unimaginable and even far beyond the limits of his imagination. Even in other places, it was enough to form a level of aura that was like a real world. This kind of aura was none other than the aura of the demon realm. Sensing the aura of these demon domains, Luo Fan instantly came to a realization and understood what this place was. So it's here. the battlefield between the venerable one and the other false sage. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. From the moment he had the idea of entering the demon realm to the moment he actually entered this place, it had been more than hundreds of thousands of years. Now that he had finally arrived at the demon realm, although he was in the middle of this tragic battlefield, and although he did not know if he could really enter the stable demon realm through this tragic place, at least he was only one step away from the final goal. How could he not feel happy? At this moment, he moved his mind. He shouted, "Heavenly Cauldron Boy, quickly leave this battlefield!" "Yes, Master." Heavenly Cauldron Boy's voice sounded. Then, the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron Boy began to quickly break out of the chaotic battlefield. However, Luo Fan's words were still a little slow. Just as the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron moved, a small hill-like object that looked like a fragment of a round hammer appeared out of thin air beside the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron and slammed towards the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. At this moment, the extremely intense chaos in the surroundings became even more serious and pure. Originally, he could faintly see that the surroundings were evolving towards stability and calmness, but after the appearance of this round hammer fragment, that trend could no longer be seen. Instead, it continued to sink into an even more chaotic state. It really is the magic treasure of the other level 9 false sage. As soon as Luo Fan saw this round hammer fragment, he knew that his previous vague guess was indeed correct. In fact, the magic treasure shadows that appeared in the space-time channel and kept blocking him were, in fact, because he was constantly approaching this battlefield, agitating the power of the two magic treasures that had previously fought. In other words, the power of the genuine Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron and the round hammer had triggered the collision between the two magic treasure shadows. The owner of the three-legged round cauldron was the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron, and the owner of this round hammer was naturally the other level 9 false sage who had fought with the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. Just as this thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, the hill-like round hammer fragment had already crushed the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. At this moment, Luo Fan felt the shadow of death looming over him. Even the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron made cracking sounds, as if it was collapsing and being destroyed. However, this time, Luo Fan did not feel the vibration that he had felt when he had encountered the magic treasure shadows previously. Of course, this wasn't because the power of the round hammer magic treasure fragment couldn't compare to the numerous magic treasure phantoms from before. On the contrary, it was because the power of the fragment was tens of thousands of times stronger than the magic treasure phantoms from before. The reason why Luo Fan felt conflicted now was that although the collision of the magic treasure shadows was powerful, it was still within the limits of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. The Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron could calmly disperse the impact, which made Luo Fan feel like he was about to die when he was swept by this force. This time, the power of the round hammer fragment far exceeded the limits of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron, and it could not allow the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron to disperse the impact. It directly destroyed its body and caused damage to the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. In this way, Luo Fan was not swept by the force, so he naturally did not feel that uncomfortable. It was also because of this that Luo Fan felt a premonition that his life was in danger. Although it seemed so tragic before, he did not feel this premonition. In fact, this was very easy to understand. It was like dealing with an egg. If one used a gentle force to knock the egg against the table, the yolk inside the egg would be shaken, but the eggshell would not be damaged at all. However, if one used an extremely fast speed and great force to smash the egg against the edge of a bowl, the eggshell would naturally be broken, but the yolk inside would not be shaken too much. Just as Luo Fan's premonition of danger was so strong that he suspected he would be completely killed in the next moment, a terrifying shock swept through his body. This made him feel extremely uncomfortable, and it was very difficult for him to maintain his body's integrity. However, on the contrary, the premonition that his life was about to be extinguished had completely disappeared. Such a change naturally surprised Luo Fan. After he managed to recondense his body, he looked at the outside world and found out what had saved him. I was actually saved by this. He could not help but smile bitterly when he saw this. It turned out that there was another magic treasure fragment outside. This fragment was about the same size as the previous round hammer fragment, and it was also the size of a small mountain. At this moment, it collided with the round hammer fragment, and the round hammer fragment was sent flying far away from Luo Fan's divine court heavenly cauldron. Chapter 12:14. This fragment did not chase after the fragment of the round hammer. Instead, it stopped in front of the divine sky cauldron, as if it was hesitating whether to crush the divine sky cauldron or chase after the fragment of the round hammer. This change made Luo Fan instantly realize that the fragment of the divine sky cauldron had not been specifically trying to save him. The reason it had knocked away the fragment of the round hammer was simply because it was hostile to the fragment itself. The reason it had saved him was not because it was incidental. It was just a coincidence. At this moment, the fragment of the round hammer suddenly disappeared into thin air. When it reappeared, it had already hit the foot of the cauldron. In an instant, a terrifying wave erupted. It was as if everything was about to return to a chaotic state and enter a state of ultimate annihilation. This feeling swept through Luo Fan's heart. Although these two items were only fragments, they were both fragments of a pseudo-saint level 9 magic treasure. The power contained in them was so strong that it was tens of thousands of times stronger than the divine sky cauldron that Luo Fan had refined. One could imagine the consequences of the collision of these two fragments. When the two collided, Luo Fan even felt the surrounding light and shadow change, returning to the dusky state before he entered. This was clearly because the force of the collision had exceeded the limit that the divine sky cauldron could withstand. As a result, the divine sky cauldron could not maintain its stable state at all. After such an impact, it could not even maintain the power of the projection of the outside world. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly ordered the divine sky cauldron boy to control the divine sky cauldron and quickly leave, trying to avoid all possible magic treasure fragments. After a while, the surrounding light and shadow projection recovered, allowing Luo Fan to see the outside world again. At this moment, the two fragments that were fighting and colliding with each other had already disappeared. Even if Luo Fan tried his best, he could not find any traces of their existence. His surroundings were filled with the same chaotic scene as when he first saw it. It was as if nothing had changed. I dodged it, Luo Fan thought to himself, but he did not let his guard down. The heavenly cauldron of the divine court did not need him to activate it now. He quickly flew in the direction where the chaos was weaker. His anxious state made him look like a stray dog. Suddenly, Luo Fan recalled the cracking sound when he was crushed by the fragments. He shuddered slightly and hurriedly tried to sense the condition of the heavenly cauldron. He heaved a sigh of relief, because, although there were many fine cracks on the divine hall heavenly cauldron, those cracks were swiftly disappearing. Clearly, the divine hall heavenly cauldron was swiftly repairing the damage caused by the fragment. What a pity! If I could have fused the cauldron's feet, the power of the heavenly divine court cauldron would have increased even more. Luo Fan sighed inwardly. He reluctantly looked in the direction he had come from. Although at a high level, the material of the magic treasure itself was no longer the most important factor of the magic treasure, it was just like how the most important thing for a scientist was his brain. However, if he was physically strong, it would also have a great effect on the development of his wisdom. The material of the magic treasure also had a considerable impact on the power of the magic treasure. Although Luo Fan had borrowed the space-time formation to refine the heavenly cauldron of the divine court that he had refined, he had spent billions of trillions of times more time compared to the time he had spent on it. However, the materials he had used were merely a mass of grayish existence that existed between heaven and earth and the primal chaos gap. Such a material was naturally incomparable to the material that the divine hall heavenly cauldron had collected over millions of years. In fact, it was precisely because of this that the divine hall heavenly cauldron that Luo Fan had refined was so fragile in front of the two pseudo-saint treasures. It could barely withstand the aftermath of their collision. Under such circumstances, if Luo Fan could fuse the cauldron's feet into his divine hall heavenly cauldron, it would definitely improve the quality of the divine hall heavenly cauldron by a huge margin. Thus, the power of the divine hall heavenly cauldron would be greatly enhanced. After all, the divine hall heavenly cauldron would no longer have to dodge or escape from any fragment. Unfortunately, this was just wishful thinking. The power of the divine hall heavenly cauldron itself was far less than that fragment, and Luo Fan's own strength was much weaker than the divine hall heavenly cauldron. He could not even exert much of the divine hall heavenly cauldron's power. With such a combination of powers, how could he completely fuse the fragment into the divine hall heavenly cauldron? Unless Luo Fan could be as omnipotent as a saint in the demon realm as he was in the previous universe. Obviously, Luo Fan could not even enter the demon realm now. How could he have such power? Therefore, Luo Fan's regret and reluctance could only be regret and reluctance. There was no chance for him to change the reality at all. After lamenting for a while, Luo Fan's heart trembled. He hurriedly controlled the divine hall heavenly cauldron to dodge quickly. The reason why he dodged was because he found that the chaotic scene around him had suddenly changed inexplicably. It was suddenly suppressed, and suddenly became more chaotic. This was clearly the behavior of the two fragments of the pseudo-divine treasures nearby. How could Luo Fan, who had already suffered losses, not be cautious? Sure enough, just as he was dodging, he found the corners of two more fragments appearing at the end of his sight. Although the two fragments were not as huge as the two he encountered before, they were still quite impressive. They were at least 100 meters in diameter. By observing the corner, Luo Fan could find that the two fragments should be the surface of the two magic treasures because there were strange marks on them. They seemed to be some kind of strange runes that were originally engraved on the magic treasures. At this time, the two fragments were not colliding with each other. Instead, the fragment of the round cauldron was emitting some kind of strange red light that washed against the fragment of the round hammer. It seemed to be refining the fragment of the round hammer, while the fragment of the round hammer emitted some kind of colorless and pure light to resist the washing. The speed of the heavenly cauldron was quite fast. By the time Luo Fan saw the change clearly, it had already left that position and left the battle at the end of his sight. In this way, Luo Fan encountered the scene of the two pseudo-divine treasures fighting with each other almost every once in a while. Sometimes, he even saw the magic treasure fragment smashing the other into even finer pieces. It even created a space-time channel for the magic treasure fragment to rush into and disappear from the battlefield. Every time he encountered such a situation, Luo Fan would actually have an inexplicable impulse in his heart. He wanted to rush over and collect all the broken fragments, or integrate them into the heavenly cauldron, or integrate them into the boy creation. Fortunately, he was still rational. He knew that if the heavenly cauldron rushed over, it would be like sending itself to its doorstep. The winning fragment would definitely not be stingy to completely smash the heavenly cauldron. Therefore, although he had such an impulse in his heart, Luo Fan urged the boy creation to control his body and escape that position at a faster speed. Of course, although it was possible to dodge more in most cases, there were times when it could not be avoided at all. Every time this happened, Luo Fan once again felt his fragility and the fragility of the heavenly cauldron. He felt that because he had completed an important step of cultivation in that universe, he had obtained the power of an almost omnipotent sage in that universe, and his pride was constantly dispelled. He truly realized how fragile he was in the Devil Realm. Compared to the high-level forces of the Devil Realm, he was still a tiny shrimp. Fortunately, every time he encountered a fragment, there were at least two opposing fragments. The biggest enemies of these fragments were each other. As for the appearance of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court, they would only give it a passing glance, and would then be diverted by the opposing fragment. Thus, although Luo Fan's a heavenly cauldron of the divine court was often on the verge of collapse, it still managed to safely break through the barrier and rush out of that incomparably chaotic area. When he really rushed out of that area, Luo Fan could not help but have an urge to burst into tears. After carefully confirming that he was in the depths of the sea and that there were no other dangers around him, he carefully examined the appearance of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. This checked. He could not help but sigh. Fortunately, he had refined the heavenly cauldron of the divine court before entering that door. If he did not have the heavenly cauldron of the divine court, he would not have been able to rush out. Even if he was lucky enough to dodge a few attacks, he would have been completely obliterated by the terrifying damage caused by the collision. The reason why he was so sure. The reason was because of the current changes to the heavenly cauldron. The current heavenly cauldron had completely changed shape. It was almost impossible to tell that it was a three-legged cauldron. Instead, it looked like a ball of discarded bronze ingot. The three legs of the cauldron were twisted into a ball, and the mouth of the cauldron above it had been squeezed together by the collision. There were bumps all around it, and it looked like a crumpled piece of paper. If it weren't for the heavenly cauldron's mysteriousness, Luo Fan might have already been squeezed into minced meat, and his entire body would have been erased. If it weren't for the heavenly cauldron's mysteriousness, Luo Fan would have entered the cauldron's mouth, but he was actually inside the heavenly cauldron's space-time. With a thought, Luo Fan's figure had already appeared in the outside world. As soon as he appeared, he could not help but be shocked. There's actually such a holy land for cultivation. This is tens of thousands of times better than the universe on Earth before it was broken. At this moment, he knew that he was already in the real Devil Realm. The Devil Realm was a world where the sky was round and the earth was square. The entire world was boundless. At least, it was boundless to Luo Fan. The area he was in was a boundless sea, and there were islands scattered all over this sea. Of course, although these islands were densely packed, they were all very far away from where Luo Fan was at the moment. The vitality that filled this void was similar to that of the universe on Earth before it was broken. The stability of space and time was actually at the same level as that of the universe on Earth before it was broken. The reason why Luo Fan was so shocked and couldn't believe that such a holy land for cultivation actually existed was that there was no dark underworld here. The great path of the Devil Realm was completely integrated with the laws and laws. It was not located in the depths of the laws and laws, nor was it independent of the laws and laws. Instead, it was completely integrated with the laws and laws. In other words, the laws of this world were different from any other world that Luo Fan had ever seen. They possessed the power to reach the Great Tao, and any living creature that comprehended a certain law would be able to reach the Great Tao. Any living being that comprehended a certain law would be equivalent to completely comprehending the Great Path corresponding to that law or law. If a living being could completely comprehend all the laws and laws, then it would be equivalent to completely comprehending the entire Great Path. Then, they would obtain almost omnipotent power in this world. In essence, they wouldn't be saints. However, they would be able to take on the role of saints. Under such circumstances, if a cultivator wanted to comprehend the Great Path, they would no longer have to pin their hopes on illusory opportunities like in other worlds. They could only pin their hopes on hard-to-grasp Great Path enlightenment. Instead, they would have a path to follow and would be able to advance. Finally, they would be able to approach the final destination step by step. Such a world reduced the difficulty of comprehending the Great Path by many times. How could it be described as a holy land for cultivation? Of course, this was of no use to the current Luofan. Although he hadn't fully comprehended the Great Path, he could already look down on it. For him, who could comprehend everything, such convenience was of course meaningless. However, this did not reduce Luofan's shock. After all, such a technique was simply unimaginable to him in the past. Even in the world that he created, he couldn't achieve this step. This showed how difficult it was to achieve this step and completely integrate the Great Path with the laws and laws. Such a difficult thing was placed in front of him out of thin air at this time. How could he not be shocked? Could it be that the 54 sages of the demon realm are existences that have completely comprehended the laws and laws? Luofan couldn't help but wonder. However, such doubts were quickly denied by himself. There was no other reason. He had previously comprehended the aura of a certain demon realm sage. Although the sages of the demon realm were not as good as the sages of the Earth universe, they were still true sages. In essence, they still had the characteristics of being indestructible, immortal, omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. However, this was not something that an existence that was not a sage in essence could compare to. Shaking his head and expelling such thoughts, Luofan looked back at the place where he came from. What appeared behind him was an incomparably chaotic scene. This chaotic scene was exactly the same as what he had seen before. Obviously, it was the place where he came out from. It was also the battlefield where the Venerable One and the other level 9 pseudosage fought. The area of this chaos was extremely vast. It covered a radius of hundreds of millions of miles. In the area that it enveloped, time, space, matter, energy, laws, and everything else was in chaos. However, it was not the kind of chaos that was similar to the state of chaos, but the kind of chaos that was similar to the apocalypse. Amidst the chaos, thunderous booms could be heard from time to time, shaking the entire space and causing the surrounding sea to violently churn. Vaguely, there were many huge shadows that were engaged in an extremely intense battle. This should have been a continent or an island, but because of the battle between the two of them, it completely disappeared, turning into this current chaos. Luofan guessed as he looked at the way the surrounding seawater flowed. Although he could not safely escape from that extremely chaotic area, it did not mean that it would destroy everything, nor did it mean that the surrounding seawater would be devoured. On the contrary, because this chaos occurred on the level of time, space, laws, and laws, the surrounding seawater remained the same as it was before the chaos appeared. This allowed Luofan to guess the scene of this area before the chaos appeared through the changes in the flow of the surrounding seawater. It's a pity that this place must have been full of vitality and even a large number of powerful practitioners. But now, because of this, it has become a forbidden area for living beings, with no vitality within hundreds of millions of miles. After guessing the original appearance of this area, Luofan could not help but sigh again. Within hundreds of millions of miles around this huge chaos, there was not even any seaweed at the bottom of the sea, let alone fish, shrimps, or other marine creatures. In the sky, no birds or other creatures dared to approach this area, no matter how high it was. Suddenly, a soft sound came into Luofan's ears. Then he felt an invisible force sweeping out from the chaos, sweeping across hundreds of millions of miles in an instant, wiping out the seawater within hundreds of millions of miles in an instant, revealing the seabed within hundreds of millions of miles. Then, the surrounding layers of laws and laws shook violently, twisting the spacetime within this area like a fried dough twist. If it were not for the fact that Luofan was a Tao master at the exceptional realm and his cultivation had reached the flawless realm, such a change might have caused him great harm. This change lasted for half a day before it completely subsided. When it completely subsided, seawater began to rush in from hundreds of millions of miles away, filling up the exposed seabed due to the disappearance of the seawater. However, it would obviously take a long time to do so. The disappearance of the seawater could be achieved in an instant, but the replenishment of the seawater needed to flow according to the law. Obviously, although the speed of the seawater was not slow, it could not be done in a short time to flow over hundreds of millions of miles. Chapter 12:15. At this moment, the changes happening in the sea within a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers were certainly not as simple as the seawater turning into nothingness. In fact, the seawater turning into nothingness was only a manifestation of the fundamental mutation. Just the outward appearance alone was already so terrifying, enough to completely wipe out all living beings within a radius of billions of kilometers. It was easy to imagine just how terrifying the true mutation would be. If this was not enough to make it a forbidden zone, then Luo Fan could not think of any other place that could. Looking at the various abnormal manifestations around him, Luo Fan's expression gradually became calm. For him, the changes in the surroundings only made him sigh with emotion. The battle between the main body and the other level, 9 pseudo-sage powerhouse was so intense and terrifying, but he didn't feel anything else at all. Naturally, he wouldn't linger here for too long. I can't stay here for long. Although the main body's injuries have worsened due to the previous attack, and it will be difficult for him to personally deal with me, who knows if he has any powerful forces? Will he send experts from his forces to deal with me? Moreover, if the venerated body could appear, it wouldn't be too strange if another level 9 pseudo-saint appeared. As Luo Fan thought this, he put away the heavenly cauldron of the divine court that was working hard to recover, looked in a direction, and flew away in a streak of light. The demon realm's nomological law layer had fused with the great Tao, so its degree of tightness was naturally not something that other worlds and other universes could compare to. Under such laws, wanting to fly beyond the limits of physics was thousands or even tens of thousands of times more difficult than in other universes. Under such circumstances, even if it was Luo Fan, if he wanted to cross a distance of hundreds of millions of miles in an instant like in other universes, it would be extremely difficult. However, it would take a long time to comprehend and familiarize himself with the laws of the demon world. Therefore, his current flying speed was only a few 100,000 kilometers in an instant. Such a speed left a long mark in the void. It was impossible to be as untraceable as he had been in the past. Luo Fan didn't choose his direction randomly. In the direction he was heading towards there was a continent, or in other words, a huge island with a considerable area. Luo Fan entered the demon realm. Of course, it was not to find a place to cultivate, but to understand the secrets of the devil realm. It would be best if he knew how the sages of the devil realm appeared, how they cultivated, and what methods he had to use to become such a sage. In order to achieve this goal, it was obviously impossible to build a car behind closed doors. Communication. Thus, what he needed to do here was naturally to find the cultivators in the devil realm and communicate with them so that he could understand the many secrets of the devil realm. The reason why he chose the island that was as large as a continent was because it wasn't too far away from here. Most importantly, he sensed an aura that was powerful but didn't pose much of a threat to him. A powerful aura meant that there was a cultivator there who might know more secrets, and he could obtain more information from them. The most important point was that they were not much of a threat to him. Right now, his deepest understanding of the devil realm was from the battle with the venerated lord. That kind of despair-inducing power made him very wary of the entire devil realm. There was no aura that could threaten him. This was the most important point. Of course, Luo Fan also knew that although he didn't sense any aura that could threaten him, it didn't mean that there were no cultivators that could. After all, if a cultivator was many times stronger than him, he wouldn't be able to sense the existence of their aura if they wanted to hide it. Now that he didn't sense any aura that could threaten him, it might be because those that could threaten him had completely concealed their aura. Although he knew this, Luo Fan couldn't think of anything else. After all he could do was try his best to decide what he should do based on his own understanding and his own perception. If these existences that completely exceeded the limits of his perception were really there, no matter how cautious he was, it would be useless in the end. In the end, he could only blame himself for being unlucky. In other universes, Luo Fan could cross this region with just a thought. In the end, it took him half a day to cross this region. Half a day later, Luo Fan finally arrived on this island. Because of his apprehension towards the Devil Realm cultivators, Luo Fan didn't directly hover above the island. Instead, he landed on a port at the edge of the island. The scenery of this island was full of ancient Chinese scenery. Furthermore, it was the scenery of the Han and Tang dynasties. Although there were a lot of powerful auras gathered on the entire island, there were also a lot of mortals. Luo Fan thought about it and knew that there were at least trillions of mortals on this island. These mortals formed tens of thousands of countries on this island and formed a huge society. The few powerful auras that Luo Fan sensed from afar that were not a threat to him were in the middle of this island. They occupied the best geographical position and formed an area that tens of thousands of countries did not dare to approach. The port that Luo Fan landed on was an ordinary one. It was not big, and the number of ships entering and leaving every day was not too dense. The entire port was not considered desolate, but it was not prosperous either. It could only be considered average. The Great Primitive World. Chapter 1254. Islands. When Luo Fan landed, he hid his body slightly, so his landing did not attract the attention of any living beings. None of the living beings who were either working in the port or entering and exiting the port noticed Luo Fan. Even if they noticed the existence of Luo Fan later, they just felt that they had not noticed his existence before. They did not realize that he had appeared out of thin air. Luo Fan looked at the lifestyles of many living beings in this port and had a deeper understanding of the Devil Realm. Although the Demon Realm had become a holy land for cultivation because of the integration of the Great Path and the rules and laws, this did not mean that all living beings could cultivate. It did not mean that the nature of life of the mortals here was higher than that of other universes. In fact, in the Devil Realm, at the very least, the mortals on this island that Luo Fan had seen were similar to the mortals on Earth before the world was shattered. Even the mortals in the many worlds that Luo Fan had experienced were similar to the mortals on this island. Their lifespans were also less than 100 years, and they were also like ants in front of cultivators. A casual pinch could kill or injure hundreds or thousands of people. This was almost certain. In any world, the distribution of living beings of all levels of life essence was definitely in the shape of a pyramid. The higher the level, the fewer there would be. The lower the nature of life, the more there would be. The mortals who did not live to 100 years old were the most solid. The most stable bottom of the pyramid supported the existence of the entire pyramid. In any world, in order to form a perfect life level and form a stable social situation, it was obviously impossible to lack the bottom of the pyramid. Therefore, in any world, in any part of the world, even in a world that was a level higher than a perfect world, the lowest level of living beings were ordinary mortals with less than 100 years of lifespan and could be easily pinched by cultivators into hundreds or thousands of ordinary mortals. Luo Fan walked casually. He did not dare to be too arrogant because he was worried about the high-level forces in the Devil Realm. But it did not mean that he could not use any power. Of course, it was impossible for him to walk like this with ordinary strength or ordinary footstep. Instead, he was using a technique that shrank the ground 2 inches. Every single step he took seemed very ordinary, but he had traversed dozens of kilometers, hundreds of kilometers, and even thousands of kilometers. With Luo Fan's outstanding sensing ability, he quickly sensed it. The place where he landed belonged to a country called the Ling Kingdom on this island. This country was attached to a country called the Seven Knights Kingdom, and the Seven Knights Kingdom was attached to another more powerful country called the Fong Lian Kingdom. And so on and so forth. Finally, it pointed to the three largest countries on this island, a powerful country called the Heavenly Cloud Kingdom. And behind the Heavenly Cloud Kingdom, there was a cultivation sect, a powerful cultivation sect called the Azure Temple. It was said that there were countless immortals in this Azure Temple, and any one of them could easily crush any ordinary country on this island, which was called the Mirror Island by all living beings on this island. It was even said that the Heavenly Cloud Nation could only be crushed by a few more fingers. The Azure Temple, the Een God sect, and the Wu Yen Temple, these three sects corresponded to the three big countries. Under the three big countries there were many small and big countries, and finally formed a relatively stable and balanced system. So that was it. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan arrived in front of a building in the capital of the Ling Kingdom. This building was none other than the residence of the Ling Kingdom's state preceptor. He did not know how the other places in the Devil Realm were, but at least on this island, among the tens of thousands of big and small countries, whether it was a big country like the Heavenly Cloud Kingdom or a small country like the Ling Kingdom, there was a state preceptor. As for these state preceptors, they were all cultivators of varying strength. At this moment, the person who lived in the state preceptor's residence in front of Luo Fan was a cultivator whose cultivation level was equivalent to the Tai Pure Yang level. No one dared to break into the state preceptor's residence. As soon as Luo Fan came to a stop, the guard at the gate of the state preceptor's residence shouted loudly. The guard was a martial artist, but he was extremely powerful. His martial arts cultivation was even comparable to that of an immortal Tao cultivator. In fact, such cultivators were already able to enter the Tao from the martial path. Their strength was extremely powerful, and more importantly, they had already obtained immortality. Moreover, because they were existences that entered the Tao from the martial path, their strength was much stronger than ordinary cultivators of the immortal Tao. Luo Fan only smiled faintly at this shout. Although he had achieved transcendence in his physical body, his heart was still a slave. He sighed to himself. How could he not see that although the guard's duty was to guard the door, and it was his duty to warn others not to barge in, when the guard shouted this, his heart was filled with a kind of joy, a kind of joy. It was obvious that he enjoyed this kind of work very much, and there was no sense of detachment at all. He said lightly, "Go and inform this state preceptor that a fellow practitioner has come to visit." Fellow practitioner? Every day, there were countless people who claimed to be a fellow practitioner of the state preceptor. If everyone claimed to be a fellow practitioner of the state preceptor, wouldn't the state preceptor be annoyed to death? Go, go. This is not a place for a filthy person like you. The guard glanced at Luo Fan, and did not see anything special about Luo Fan, so he shouted directly. As he spoke, he raised the spear in his hand. In an instant, an extremely powerful earth energy surged out. In the void, it turned into a light shadow, and directly wrapped around Luo Fan. It produced a force that wanted to push Luo Fan away. Luo Fan knew the use of the earth energy the moment it was produced. It was obviously going to push him 100 miles away. If he was an ordinary person, he would be pushed away. Even if he did not die, he would be crippled. In the face of such a earth energy push, Luo Fan only sighed, and with a casual slap, the earth energy disappeared instantly. This slap, to Luo Fan, was like a light slap to chase away a fly. He did not even use a bit of the power contained in his body. But this slap had already completely disintegrated the earth energy, and even rolled over, causing the guard to feel intense pain all over his body. It was as if he had been thrown into the 18 levels of hell, and was suffering 18 kinds of punishments. The powerful vital energy that he had painstakingly cultivated for his entire life was completely useless at this moment. It was as if he could not feel the terrible changes that were happening to his body at all. This change finally made the guard wake up. After all, he was an existence that could enter the Tao from martial arts, so how could he be stupid? He hurriedly endured the pain, knelt on the ground, and kowtowed to Luo Fan continuously. But because of the physical and mental torture, he could not even speak a complete sentence. At this moment, the guard finally came to a realization and hurriedly knelt down, saying, "I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I have offended immortal elder, please forgive me." Luo Fan's heart moved. The pain that the guard had suffered disappeared in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the soldier who was suffering from pain felt as if he had instantly gone from the 18 layers of hell to heaven. His soul still felt the pain from before, but his body no longer had any trace of the pain from before. In the face of such a change, the guard could not react for a moment. He had a blank expression on his face. After a while, he finally reacted and kowtowed to Luo Fan, continuously thanking Luo Fan for his kindness. Those who entered the Tao from martial arts, even if they were not unyielding, should have enough strength of character. He did not expect that in the demon realm, such an existence was actually like a servant. Luo Fan looked at the two guards and could not help but sigh to himself. Martial arts was not a cultivation system that would appear in any world. However, in any world, there would inevitably be a similar cultivation system that would temper the body and obtain great power. There was no doubt about this. After all, for living creatures, their own body was the existence that they could most directly feel. Therefore, in order to obtain enough powerful combat power, strengthening the body and tempering the body was naturally the most direct way. Although the martial arts in the demon realm were very different from the martial arts in the Earth universe, their essence was the same. Luo Fan once had a very deep exchange with the martial emperor who was known as the strongest martial arts attainment in the universe. His profound martial arts attainment had already reached an incredible level at that time. Now that his cultivation realm had reached the exceptional realm of Tao Master, he had made up for all his deficiencies and achieved the flawless realm. His martial arts attainment was countless times stronger than before, and naturally, he knew the key to martial arts. He naturally sighed when he saw that the two guards who had reached the Tao from martial arts had such a performance that did not conform to the principles of martial arts. However, after sighing, he could also understand their performance. Compared to the entire fiend realm, the imperial advisor of a tiny kingdom on a tiny island was already a cultivator of the primordial unity pure yang tier, which was already tens of thousands of times stronger than the warriors who had entered the Tao through martial arts. He could even crush thousands of warriors like them with just one finger. In such a world, what could a warrior who had entered the Tao through martial arts, who was only slightly stronger than the ordinary cultivators from the Tao of immortality, amount to? Regardless of which world it was, when the entire world treated you as nothing, you would unknowingly start to treat yourself as nothing. That was why such a rare martial artist who had entered the Tao did not have the strength of a martial artist at all. His performance was even worse than that of a mortal with some strength of character. He did not feel any psychological pressure from such a servant's performance, and did it too smoothly. After knowing this, Luo Fan did not bother to care about them anymore. He just stood there and waited quietly. Of course, he was not waiting for the sky to turn dark. He was clear about the Tao of life, and the changes that had happened here were all seen by the national master. If that imperial teacher was tactful, he would obviously appear in front of Luo Fan as soon as possible. What Luo Fan was waiting for was, of course, the appearance of the imperial teacher. The speed at which the imperial teacher appeared would determine the treatment he would receive from Luo Fan. Fortunately, it seems that you are still sensible. This saves me a lot of trouble. After a while, Luo Fan said with a faint smile.